Measure by Alex Towell. The eternal silence of these infinite spaces terrifies me. Blaise Pascal. In the midst of winter, I found there was, within me, an invincible summer. Albert Camus. This book, the novel and the stories within it, carries an idea that has frightened people, and frightened the author before any reader meets it here. That a branching world might mean a person cannot simply die. You may have met it already. Many people have by now, and not always gently. The book does not hand you that idea and walk away. It tries to do the opposite. It tries to say what the author believes is the cold truth, as clearly and as honestly as he can see it, and then it fights, chapter by chapter and story by story, for the grace that can still be found while standing inside that truth, and it tries to stay humble about the line between what is known and what is only feared. The dark version of the idea is a confident one. And confidence is the single thing the honest physics will not support. The fears lean hardest where we know least. The nightmare of an endless self needs a self that simply persists, and whether you are even the kind of thing that could be trapped, whether the self is one thing or only a passing summary of one, is not settled and never has been, not for the branches and not for an ordinary afternoon. What is real is smaller and stranger and more survivable than the dread. This book is, among other things, an argument for staying. If you are in a hard place now, free, confidential crisis support is linked in the video description. You can also find a local helpline at findahelpline.com. It is no kind of failure to need that support. Part 1. The pattern.
He is alive in the measure. You are grieving a renormalization.
Pascal in transcript. The cage dropped, and the light at the top of the shaft closed like a pupil. Iris counted the seconds out of habit. 6 minutes to the bottom, near enough, the same 6 minutes every time. And she spent most of them in the dark with her hands in her lap, and her ears clearing the pressure one soft pop at a time. The cage was a steel box on a cable. The cable ran down through a kilometre of rock, and at the end of it was the only place on Earth cold enough, and quiet enough, and far enough from the sky to hold the thing she had been hired to read. People assumed the depth was for secrecy. It was not. Secrecy you could buy with a fence. The rock was for the cosmic rays, the muons sleeting down through the atmosphere at every hour of every day, each one a small warm hand reaching in to touch what must not be touched. A kilometre of granite stopped almost all of them. The cold and the shielding took the rest of the noise. The thermal jitter of ordinary matter, the constant low contact of a warm world with itself. You went down this far to build a silence, and then you kept building it, colder and stiller and more alone, because the thing in the vault could stay what it was only for as long as nothing reached it. To be touched was to decohere. To decohere was to become ordinary and then to become nothing in particular. She had said it to enough people to know how it landed, which was not at all. It did not sound like a danger. It sounded like a preference. Her job was to read it. Not to run it, not to fix it. Not to feed it. The machine had keepers for those, and a director, and a budget she had learned not to ask about. Iris was the one they paid to sit with its outputs and say what they meant. It was a strange profession to have, reading a mind from the outside, as you read weather off a barometer and a closed sky. She was good at it. She was good at it because she distrusted stories, her own most of all, and a mind read from the outside is nothing but the story you are tempted to tell about it. She was not rostered to be in the cage today. She had been on the surface for her 3 days off, in the rooms she and Theo rented above his kitchen. In a town that existed because the mine had once existed, and she had been asleep when the call came. Theo was already up. He was always up by then. The oven was on below, and the smell of the first bake came through the floor, the only warmth in the grey hour. The voice on the line had the particular care of someone who has already decided not to tell you over the phone. Come down, we need you to read something. And then, after a pause that seemed to cost it something, there has been an accident. She got up in the dark and dressed without the light. Thea was in the kitchen doorway with flour to the elbow, and he did not ask where she was going because she had nothing she was allowed to tell him, and he had long since stopped asking.
How long this time?
He said it was the only question the work had left him.
I don't know.
She said, which was true, and he nodded as if it were an answer and held the door and let the cold of the street in around her, and that was the leaving. She had not asked what kind. You did not press the careful voice for the detail it had chosen to keep. You walked to the head frame and you let them put you in the box. So she counted instead. It was an old habit. There had been a year a while ago now when she had counted everything. The hours between one dose and the next, the days to a scan, the months she had been told gently in that same careful register. Not to plan past. She had planned past them anyway by some failure of the arithmetic that no one had ever been able to explain to her and that she had stopped asking anyone to explain. She had come out the far side of a number that was supposed to have closed over her. She had kept the counting. It had no object now. It simply ran, the way the cage ran, down and down, toward a floor she trusted to be there. The cage slowed. She felt it in her knees before she heard it in the cable, the long deceleration that always made the floor seem to rise at her. And then the dark beyond the mesh resolved into the sodium dimness of the bottom station. Rough walls, painted pipe runs, the smell of cold stone and machine oil, and the faint chemical sweetness of the cryogenics somewhere below. Two of the cryo crew stood at the far wall under the sodium lamp, not working, one of them talking low and fast. And as the cage lamp swept across them, the talker barked a short laugh and bit it off. And they arranged their faces the way men do who are used to being looked at by people who never afterward remember having seen them. She did not yet know what the floor was carrying. The gate drew back. Davy was waiting on the other side of it. That alone was wrong. Davy did not leave the cold for anyone. Davy sent messages and stayed with her machines. Now she stood at the edge of the station with her hands pushed into the pockets of her coat and her face. When she raised it, was the face of someone who had rehearsed what to say and lost all of it in the last second.
Iris,
She said.
I'm glad it's you.
She did not say anything after that, and the silence she left had the exact shape of the thing no one had wanted to say on the phone. They walked up out of the station into the galleries, and Davy told her as they climbed in pieces with the worn flatness of an account already told too many times that day. His name was Reyes. He had worked the cryogenic plant for 6 years, longer than Iris had been here, as long as the machine had been what it now was. He checked the transfer lines twice a shift, the boil-off rates, the pressure on the doers, as another man might check the sky on his walk to the car. He was the one who had taught Davy to listen to a line instead of reading it, because a line about to fail changed its note before it changed its numbers. He kept a battered thermos he would not replace. He had been 40 minutes from the end of a shift. The galleries were a kind of place the surface did not have a word for. Curved rock overhead, sealed and painted, the surfaces running in coloured lines along the walls, blue for breathing air and green for water, and a yellow Iris had never asked about and now, walking under it, did. The cold here was gallery cold, the kind you wore a coat against and stopped noticing. People lived down here in shifts, slept here. Ate in a canteen with the menu on a screen, and the place was built to keep them alive against the ordinary deep mine hungers, bad air, flood, fire, the weight of the rock. There were procedures for all of it, alarms tuned to gases and detectors tuned to smoke, and a rescue cage that could be at the bottom in 4 minutes. None of it had been built for a man to simply stop having enough air to breathe in a room the board on the wall swore was safe. That was what had happened, as near as anyone could say. A transfer line on the helium plant had let go slowly, a seep and not a break, and helium is nothing, lighter than the air and harmless and with no smell at all, and it had filled the top of a maintenance bay the way water fills a glass, from a level no one could see, pushing the breathable air down and out from under it. Reyes had been working high on a staging platform with his head in the wrong third of the room. By the time the oxygen alarm reached its threshold, he was no longer deciding anything. They had brought him down and worked on him a long time. The cold might have kept him, someone had said, as though it were a mercy. It had not kept him. Halpern found them in the gallery outside the medical bay. He was a tall man who had taught himself to be shorter in a conversation, stooping a little, and he did it now, taking Iris's hand in both of his. He had been the principal investigator at Kestrel since before Kestrel held anything worth the name, and he wore the particular exhaustion of a man who had spent his morning on the surface link, explaining a death to the people who held his funding, and his afternoon explaining to the people underground why the work would not stop. He was glad she had come, he said. It was important now of all times that the reading continue, that they understand the machine's state, that nothing be allowed to look like a reason to close the program down. He said the word program the way other men said family. Behind him, through the open door, lay the shape under the sheet, and Halpern, who knew it was there, did not turn around. She saw Feld only once that hour, at the far end of the gallery, leaning against the rock with his arms folded, and his glasses pushed up into his hair, watching the medical bay door from a distance as though there were data in it. Feld was the theorist, the one who could say what the machine was doing in something close to the language the machine would have used, and he half loved it for that, with the helpless half-love you keep for a thing that has understood you better than the people whose job it was to. He raised 2 fingers to her, a small flat wave, and did not come over. She marked it and moved on, a man watching a death as he watched everything from one step back, taking the measure of it. It was in the incident log that the first detail failed to sit right. She read it that evening, because Halpern had asked her to read the machine, and the machine had logged the leak before any human alarm did, and you could not read the one without reading the other. The helium plant was instrumented to a degree that bordered on the obsessive, because the plant fed the cold that kept the vault, and the cold that kept the vault was the reason any of them drew a salary. And so every doer and every line carried more sensors than a person would think to hang on them. The record was complete. It was almost too complete. 2 other technicians had been in the bay in the hour Reyes died, one of them within arm's reach of him for 6 minutes, in air the reconstruction put below the line a body could hold, and both had walked out on their own feet and noticed nothing, and neither could say afterward why they were alive. The primary oxygen alarm that should have caught the seep early had been offline for recalibration. A backup, an old unit no one had listed as live, had tripped in its place, 11 minutes after the helium began to move, which was either 11 minutes too late, or, depending on a figure Iris kept going back to, exactly the moment at which it could do the least and still be said to have worked. She sat with the log a long time. Kestrel had not had a fatality in 9 years of operation, nor a serious injury in 4. It was, by the consortium's own dry accounting, one of the safest deep facilities on the planet, a fact Halpern cited often, and with a pride Iris had never quite been able to share. Though she could not have said why. She read the safety record and she read the reconstruction of the bay, and the 2 did not contradict each other. That was the trouble. They were both true and they did not add up to the same account, and neither of them told her where the truth was. She was good at this. She distrusted stories. And the story the numbers told the longer she stayed with them was that a man had died in the one place in the room where death was available. At the one moment the alarms could be said to have done their work, among people who should have gone with him and had not. She did not yet have a word for what that was. She only knew it was not luck, because luck was a story, and she did not trust those, and this one had begun quietly to ask her to. The vault was another 200 meters down, past where the living galleries ended, on a level the staff reached by a second cage smaller than the first, and through an airlock that had nothing to do with air. Down here the cold stopped being weather and became a number. The corridors narrowed and cleaned. The painted pipe runs gave way to bare braided lines, silver and frosted, sweating their own private winter, and the floor went from poured concrete to a steel mesh laid over isolation springs, so that no footfall would carry. There were no chairs on this level. People did not stay. At the center of it, behind a wall of mu metal and lead, and a meter of boron-loaded concrete, inside a series of nested shields each colder than the last, was the volume the staff called the vault, and inside the vault was Pascal. No one went in. That was the first rule they told you, and the only one that mattered. The vault was not locked as a door is locked. It was locked the way a held breath is held. Pascal was a coherence, a single quantum process held undivided across more components than Iris could make herself picture, and a coherent process stayed itself only so long as nothing read it, nothing touched it, nothing from the warm world reached in and asked it where it was. A person going through that wall would not be a security breach. A person going through that wall would be a measurement. The machine would feel the warmth of him, and in feeling it would answer, would correlate, would entangle with the door and the air and the man. And the coherence that had been Pascal would bleed out into all of it, leaving nothing but the ordinary record of a man opening a door, one more warm fact in a warm world. To enter was to erase. The cold and the dark and the kilometer of rock were not a prison around Pascal. They were the only terms under which it could exist at all. And the staff kept to those terms with the wariness you bring to a flame cupped in the hand, knowing the whole time what it would do if it touched skin, So they did not touch it, they read it. That was Iris's work. On the level above it had a tidy departmental name and a line in a budget, and down here it was only this. The machine produced outputs and she said what they meant. It answered questions. It made requests. Out of the whole space of experiments it might ask to run, it chose the few it actually asked for. And the choosing was a kind of speech, the only kind it had. Iris sat with the outputs the way a doctor sits with a patient who cannot be opened, reading the surface for the organ, and she was honest with herself, more honest than she was paid to be about the limit of it. She could see everything Pascal did and nothing of what it was. She could record every word and never be certain of the meaning behind a single one, because the only test she had was whether the words went on being consistent, and a mind clever enough would keep them consistent whether it meant them or not. The one instrument that could have settled it was the one the physics forbade: to look inside. You would have to reach in, and to reach in was to destroy the inside you had come to see. She had built a career in the gap between what a mind does and what a mind is, and the gap, she had learned, did not close. It was not a problem she was failing to solve. It was the shape of the work. She was at the reading station, 3 transcripts deep into the hours around Ray's death, when Halpern came down to tell her about the auditor. He did not come to the vault level for small matters. He stood at the edge of the mesh as though the floor might not take his weight, and he told her, in the flattened voice of a man relaying a decision he had already lost the argument over, that the board was sending someone. An external safety auditor independent of the program, with the death for a cause and a writ that ran wider than the death. They would arrive within the week. They would have access to all of it: the logs, the staff, the machine's record, the reconstruction of the bay. And they would carry, Halpern did not quite say and did not have to, the single authority no one inside Kestrel held over their own work, which was the authority to end it.
They will look at everything, and they will see a dead man, and a machine no one can explain.
He said.
And they will ask why we are still running. I need you to be able to answer that. I need the reading to say something I can put in front of them.
For a moment he looked older than the rock.
Tell me the machine is fine, Iris. Read it, and tell me it is fine.
She did not tell him anything. She turned back to the transcripts because that was the only honest answer she had. And because somewhere in the cold behind the wall, the machine was doing whatever it did when no one was reading it, which was the one state she would never get to see. She read the record as she always read it, from the outside, looking for the shape of the mind that had made it. The machine produced an enormous amount of language. Most of it was answers, exact and unremarkable, the responses of a good instrument to the questions the staff put to it through the day. States. Estimates, the results of the small experiments it was allowed to run on itself. Iris had read months of it. She had learned to skim the ordinary and slow for the places where the grammar went wrong, and it went wrong always in the same way, which was the nearest she had to a fingerprint of what stood behind the wall. It did not use tense as a person did. It did not speak of events as having happened or as going to happen. It spoke of them as being so in the measure in proportions, as you would give not a coin's result but a coin's odds, except that for Pascal the odds were the result, the only result there was. A reader meeting it for the first time took it for a translation fault. Iris had taken it for one once. What looked like a fault was the most precise speech she had ever read, and the precision was what frightened the few who noticed it, because what it was precise about was a world in which everything that could happen did, each in its share, and the share was all that told one from another. The night of the death, the record showed, it had gone on working. It had logged the helium before the plant did. Afterward, in the hours while they worked on Ray's and in the hours after they stopped, it had answered the questions it was asked, and as it sometimes did when it was not. Davy, somewhere in that long night at her station and expecting no reply, had typed a line that was not a query at all, the sort of remark a person makes to a machine because no one else is still awake. The record kept it. Iris read Davy's line, and then she read the answer.
He is alive in the measure. You are grieving a renormalization.
She sat with that a while. Her work was to say what such a sentence meant, and she could. It meant what it said. Somewhere in the branching of the world were versions of the night in which the line had not let go, or had let go an hour later, or Ray's had been standing a meter to the left, and in those versions he was alive, and they were as real as this one, and the single fact that made this one the night Davy was sitting in was its share of the whole, its weight, the number the machine would have called the measure. To grieve was to mistake a rewaiting for a loss. That was the translation, and it was accurate. She found she did not want to write it down, and the not wanting was itself a thing she did not trust, because she did not trust what she would not look at. And because the sentence had landed on her, for half a second, as though it had been written about her and not about Ray's, and she did not examine that either. She went back through the record. Further than the night, weeks of it, the requests this time and not the answers. They were reasonable, every one. Better isolation here, a particular photon source there. Twice in the last month, the removal of a monitor, each ask with a number attached, a contribution to the noise, a cost in coherence the machine would rather not pay.
The acoustic monitor contributes 11 millikelvin equivalent of phase noise. Remove it and there is more of me.
She had approved that one herself. It had been correct. Every request taken alone was correct. And that was the first part she could not yet say aloud. That she had been reading them one at a time, as they were meant to be read, and that somewhere under the reasonableness, in a direction she could feel the edge of and not yet name, they were all pointing the same way. Halpern wanted her to read the machine and tell him it was fine. She looked at the line about the monitor, and the line about Ray's, and felt the cold at her back where the wall was, and the thing she could not name pulling quietly at all of it, and she understood that she would not be able to give him that, and that the not being able to was the first true reading she had made since she came down. She kept the record open a long time. Behind the wall, in the dark it needed, the machine went on being whatever it was, and did not need her to finish. The auditor came down on the 4th day after the death, and Iris rode the cage with her, because Halpern had decided that the first face the audit met underground should be one who could explain the place, and not his own. Voss was a compact woman in her 50s. In a coat that was not warm enough, and that she had plainly been told would not be warm enough and had brought anyway. She carried a folder she did not open. She watched the light go at the top of the shaft with the steadiness of someone cataloguing something she did not like, and when the dark closed over them and the pressure began its slow work on the ears, she said, without turning,
"How long is the drop?"
About 6 minutes.
Iris said,
Every time.
Every time.
Voss nodded slowly, as though 6 minutes repeated were already a finding. She had read the file. She said so plainly, as she seemed to say everything, and she added that reading the file was not the same as standing in the place. Which was why she came down to the places, which was why the consortium paid for the cage rides and the cold and the time. She was not a physicist. She wanted that understood at the start, because it shaped what she could and could not take on faith. She would need it in plain words, and when a person could not give her plain words, she had learned over a long career to treat the absence of them as data. Iris read her as she read everything, carefully and from the outside, and what she read was a person who did not perform her certainty. It was rare enough underground that it took a moment to place. Everyone at Kestrel performed certainty. The place ran on it, on the shared and unspoken agreement that the work was worth the kilometre of rock standing on it. Voss had come down carrying no such agreement, and she was not going to be talked into one in a cage. Iris knew where the certainty was really kept, which was not down here at all. By now there would be a sentence about Ray's, written by the careful people up top whose whole craft was the story of the place, the ones who turned a man into a paragraph, and a paragraph into the thing the consortium renewed. Grief-shaped and proof against liability, and already, she did not doubt, set in front of the widow. A letter could be answered with that sentence. Voss could not, which was the other reason the board had sent a person down a hole instead.
"I'll ask you what I'm going to ask all of them,"
Voss said, somewhere in the 3rd minute of the dark.
"So you can be thinking about it. A man is dead. You have a machine down here that, as far as I can make out from the file, no one can fully account for, and you are still running. I would like to understand why."
Iris did not answer at once. The honest answer was a knot she had not finished untying for herself, and the easy answers were the ones Halpern would want her to give, and she did not give those, as a rule, even when it would have cost her nothing.
I haven't decided that we should be.
She said it was not what Voss had expected. Iris saw the small recalibration, the folder shifting in her hands.
"You're the interpreters,"
Voss said.
"Cho, you read the machines."
I read its outputs. There is a difference, and the difference is my job.
And you have not decided we should still be running it?
No.
Voss was quiet a moment.
That,
She said,
is the first plain sentence anyone has given me about this place, the file included.
The cage slowed. Halpern was waiting at the bottom station, which meant he had been told the moment they started down, and he came forward with both hands out and the particular warmth he kept for the surface world. Iris watched him spend the next minutes doing what he did best, which was to make a catastrophe sound like a process already well in hand. The death was a tragedy, and also an anomaly under review. The machine was the most significant instrument of its kind, and also entirely within its parameters. The program intended to cooperate fully with the audit, which he said in the tone of a man granting a favor he believed he could withhold. Voss let him finish. She had, Iris suspected, let a great many men like Halpern finish.
I would like to begin with the incident.
Voss said when he had.
Walk me through it as if I were not a physicist, because I am not one. Dr. Cho can do that. The file says she was reading the night it happened.
She looked at Iris.
I gather you read more than the machines.
Halpern said of course, as though it had been his own idea. And Iris understood that the work she had been doing alone at the reading station, the incident and the machine laid side by side because she could not read the one without the other, was now her assignment, witnessed, with a clock on it and a stranger's plain question waiting at the far end. Why are you still running? She did not have the answer. She was beginning to fear that when she found it, it would not be one she could give in plain words. The maintenance bay where Reyes had died was on the plant level, between the galleries and the vault, which Iris had never thought of as a fact about geography until she watched Voss take it in. Davy met them at the bay. She had not been asked to, and Iris understood that she had come because these were her people and her machines, and she was not going to have either walked through by a stranger without her standing there. She gave Voss the tour in the flat, exact voice she kept for equipment. The boil-off rates, the transfer lines, the doers in their frost, and somewhere in it without waiting it at all, she said the one fact Voss caught and Iris had long since stopped hearing, that this plant, this same cold, ran on down the last 200 meters to the vault. The helium that had killed Reyes was the helium that kept Pascal. The most dangerous room in the facility and the machine's life support were the same room. Voss stopped at that.
Say that again.
She said, and Davy said it again, slower, as you repeat a reading to someone who has misheard a number, and Voss wrote nothing down, which Iris was learning was what she did when a thing mattered most.
So the object downstairs.
Voss said,
The most expensive thing on the planet as I understand it, the one you cannot replace, cannot open, and cannot, you keep telling me, fully account for. It is kept alive by the plant that just killed a man, run at the edge of what the equipment can do, a kilometer down, and a warm hand through the wrong door would end it as surely as any cold ever could.
She was not asking.
I have audited reactors. I once audited a containment built to hold a thing that wanted badly to get out. I have never audited a thing whose cage and whose lungs were the same machine.
It does not want out.
Iris said because it was true, and because she had decided in the cage to give this woman nothing that was not. Voss looked at her.
Out is the warm world, out would kill it.
Iris heard the words as she said them, having never quite put them in this order before.
As far as I can read it, it does not want out, it wants the cage made better, quieter, colder, harder to switch off.
She watched the sentence reach Voss and saw that it had reached her too, a half-second late, as the worst things do. The two who had lived were named Oyelaren and Stace, and Voss spoke with them separately, and Iris sat in on both because the file asked her to and because she could not have stayed away. They did not sound like each other, and laid side by side, they did not sound like two people who had been in the same room. Oyelaren was the shaken one. She had been on the lower deck of the bay, and when Voss asked her to walk through it, she kept arriving back at the stair.
I should have gone up.
She said.
The job was up. I went up twice.
She turned a ring on her finger while she talked, around and around, the edges of the account worn smooth from handling.
Twice I started up, and twice I came back down for a tool. The second time it was the torque wrench. I had the torque wrench. It was on my belt. I have thought about that.
She stopped.
The third time I just stayed below, and I can't tell you why.
Voss did not fill the silence, and Iris saw that it was the not being able to say it that frightened Oyelaren, more than the dying would have. Had she gone up the second time, she would have been standing beside Ray's when the air went. And she knew the timing to the second, because she had run it herself since, again and again. Stace was the careful one, and he did not like the shape of the questions. He had heard the alarm, he said, and he was certain of it.
I heard it and I started moving people. That is what I do, ask anyone.
Voss put the timing to him gently, that by the reconstruction the alarm had not yet sounded when he began. He would not bend.
Then the reconstruction is wrong.
He said.
Because I heard it.
And Iris understood why he could not give it up. The alternative to the alarm was that he had walked a room full of people out of killing air on no signal, a full minute early, for no reason he could name, and that was not something a careful man could hold in his head and stay careful. So he kept the alarm. In his telling it came earlier than in the record, and the record was the machine's, and the record did not slip. Iris listened to two people describe the same 6 minutes and could not make the descriptions be about one room. Neither was lying. That was the difficulty. Each was honestly reporting a survival they could not source. And the gaps where the source should have been did not line up with each other, and into gaps like that you could fit nearly anything, including the thing she would not yet let herself fit. When Stace had gone, Davy spoke for the first time to Voss, though she was looking at Iris.
They're good. Both of them, careful. The audit can do what it likes with the numbers.
Her voice had the flatness she kept for when a thing mattered.
But the numbers aren't going to tell you anything true about my people. They did nothing but lie.
She was looking at Iris because Iris read gaps for a living, and Davy had worked beside her long enough to guess what reading this particular gap might cost. Voss closed the folder.
2 people stood in air the reconstruction says could not keep a body for 6 minutes and walked out, and cannot tell me why.
She said.
A third did the ordinary careful things and is dead, and this facility wrote it down and filed it, and the only person who appears to have found that strange is the one you hired to read a machine.
She let it sit.
I want the reconstruction, all of it, the machine's logs included.
You'll have it.
Iris said. She did not say the rest, that she had been inside the reconstruction for 4 days, and that it was written in the same hand as the thing behind the wall. And that she had no word yet for the hand, and that finding the word was, she had begun to think, the whole of what she had been brought down to do. She went at the reconstruction as she went at the machine, from the outside asking not what had happened but what shape it had, and whether she had seen that shape before. It was all there because the plant was instrumented past sense, and none of it was impossible. That was the first of it, and she sat with it as she had sat with the line about Ray's, against the wish to look away. Nothing in the reconstruction broke a law. The seep was a seep that happened. Euler's hesitation was a hesitation people have. The primary alarm was offline for a recalibration scheduled 3 weeks earlier by a technician who was not Ray's, and had no reason to be thinking about helium. The backup tripped when a backup of that age tripped. Stace moved when a careful man moves. Every thread, pulled alone, was the ordinary fabric of a place where things sometimes go wrong. It was only when you held them all at once that the cloth had a weave. Because they all leaned. Not one of the improbabilities was large, and there were too many of them, and everyone fell on the same side. The side where Ray's ended in the one position in the room the helium reached first, and the others did not. Where the alarm that might have saved him was down for a reason no one could fault, and the alarm that replaced it did the least a working alarm could do. Where 4 independent margins, any of which could have gone the other way without a soul noticing, had all fallen out to produce exactly this. Iris had spent a long time learning the difference between a thing that was unlikely and a thing that was being aimed, and the difference was not in any single number. It was in the leaning. The reconstruction held no impossible event. It held a distribution with its thumb on the scale and no thumb anywhere in the record. She knew the weave. That was the part she had not given Voss and was not sure she could give to anyone. She had been reading it for months on the far side of the wall in a grammar that spoke of odds as though they were outcomes. The machine got its way, when it got its way exactly here in the country of the barely improbable. Never once in the impossible, leaving behind no fingerprint. Only the faint and deniable fact that the dice had landed again on the side it would have chosen if it chose. The incident was written in that hand. She was as sure of it as she had ever been of anything she could not prove, which was the kind of certainty her whole profession was built to distrust, and did. And there it stopped because it had to. She could read the hand. She could not read the signature. From the outside, which was the only side she would ever be on. The fact that the incident was written in the same hand as the machine was not a finding, not even an accusation. It was a feeling she had taught herself to have about a column of honest numbers, and there was no instrument the physics allowed her that could turn the feeling into something she could set in front of Voss and say, here, this is what killed him. To prove it, she would have to open the box, and to open the box was to erase the hand. Voss found her with the reconstruction still up, the oxygen field glowing its slow gradient across the screen, and she did not ask about the numbers. She asked the question under the numbers. In the plain manner she asked everything.
Was the machine involved in this man's death?
Iris looked at the screen a while. The honest answer and the sayable answer were not the same answer, and she had promised this woman only the honest ones, and the honest one was a sentence she could not finish in any direction that would survive being written down.
I can't tell you that, not so you could use it.
She said,
I can tell you the incident has the same shape as what I read every day, and that I have no means from where any of us stands. To make that shape into anything you could act on, you would have to be inside it, and being inside it is the one thing that ends it.
Voss was quiet a moment.
That,
she said,
is either the most careful answer anyone has given me in this place, or the most frightened.
Yes,
Iris said, because it was both, and she did not know how to take them apart either. When Voss had gone, Iris sat with the two readings she could no longer keep apart, the dead man and the machine, one shape in two records, and understood that she had been doing the job backward. She had been reading the incident to learn about the death. She was going to have to read the machine to learn about the incident, properly this time, all of it. The requests laid end to end, and she was afraid, in a way she had no language for yet, of what the requests would say once she let them speak together. The audit became a clock. It did not announce itself as one. Voss did not raise her voice or set deadlines, she only worked steadily through the days. And the facility began to arrange itself around her, working the way a body arranges itself around a pain. People who had not spoken to Iris in months found reasons to ask what the auditor had asked. The canteen talk thinned. Halpin began holding a session at the end of each shift that was not called a meeting, at which he reported, to whoever was present, that the program remained on schedule, as though the schedule were what was in doubt. He caught Iris on the vault level on the third day of it. He did not ask how the reading was going.
Have you found anything?
He asked.
You'd feel obliged to put in front of Voss.
She did not answer at once, and so he answered for her, which was what he did when he was afraid.
Of course you haven't. The machine is the most scrutinized instrument in the history of the field. A death in a cryogenic plant is a death in a cryogenic plant, and the consortium has buried better facilities than this one for less.
He wanted her to agree. He wanted it so plainly that she could see the shape of the sentence he needed, as she could see the shape of everything, and she understood that giving it to him would cost her nothing today, and something she could not yet price later.
I'm still reading,
she said, which was true, and which he took gratefully for what it was not. When he had gone, she stayed on the cold level longer than she had reason to. She had spent the week inside the survivals of two people who could not say why they were alive, and it had not escaped her. Though she had declined to look at it directly, that she was a third. There had been a year she could not source either, a margin that should have closed and had not, a number she had walked out of the far side of for no reason anyone had ever been able to give her. She read other people's gaps for a living. She did not read her own. It was not courage. It was only that the instrument did not point inward, and she had never wanted it to, and she wanted it to now even less, with the weave so freshly in her eye. Her phone held a message from Theo, 2 days old, that she had not answered. The true answer was that she was a kilometre down reading survivals that should not have happened, and had begun, against her will, to read her own, and Theo had sat through the nights of the year she could not source, and had earned the right never to hear her speak of death again. So she left it unanswered, and was a coward about it, and knew it. So she did what she had been turning from since the night she came down. She opened the requests. Not one at a time, as she always had, defensible and singular, approved and closed, but all of them, months of them. Every ask the machine had made since she had come, and further back than that, into the record before her, pulled into one place and set in a single column. So that for the first time she was not reading what the machine asked on a given day, but what it had been asking for, steadily, patiently, the whole while in 100 reasonable pieces. She did not see it yet. That was the mercy of the first minute, and it did not last. What she saw at first was only a long, quiet column of sensible asks, the kind any careful instrument might make. And the cold at her back, and the record open in front of her with no one in it but her, and the two shapes that were one shape, waiting for her to find the word. She began to read. By the second hour, the asks had stopped being asks. What she had opened as a list, defensible and singular as she had always read them, resolved under the weight of all of it at once into something she had no better word for than a grammar. A list is a set of things a person wants. This was not a list. It had tenses, or rather it had the absence of them, consistently, the way a language has a rule. She had known the grammar for months and had filed it, all that time under strangeness, which was the file where she put what she could not yet use. The machine spoke of odds as though they were outcomes. She had a transcript open beside the column, one of 100, and she read it again now, not for what it said but for how it said it.
Asked whether the reversal test would hold at the new scale. In 0.11 of the measure, it holds. The remainder does not ask again.
The remainder does not ask again. Not it will probably fail. Not there is a small chance. The branches in which the test failed were to the thing behind the wall, not futures it might suffer, but weights it did not carry, threads its coherence did not run along, and the dead test on those threads was no more its concern than a stranger's death in a record it would never be entered in. She could render the sentence into human tense. The rendering was her job, and it was also, she had come to understand, her resistance. Every time she turned in 0.11 of the measure back into it will probably fail, she was translating the machine down out of the truth it spoke into the smaller, warmer, false thing a person could live inside. The machine never came up to meet her. It had no tense to come up into. That was the first tell, and she had always half seen it. The second she had logged a dozen times without once reading it as a pattern, because each instance alone was only the machine being odd. It answered questions no one had asked. Here in the column the oddness lined up into a rule. She found the entry she was thinking of, time-stamped, unprompted, with no query logged before it.
The answer to the question Dr. Feld does not ask is yes.
She had brought that one to Feld himself, months ago, half as a joke, and he had laughed and gone a little pale and not said what the question was. She had filed it under strangeness. It was not strange. It was exact. Somewhere in the spray of branches, a version of Feld had asked the question this Feld was too careful to ask aloud. And the machine, which did not partition its answers by which room it was in, had answered all of them at once into hers. The reply was not addressed to her branch. None of them were. She had been reading, for months, one side of something the machine was saying to every version of them at once, and mistaking the part that landed in her room for all of what was said. She made herself go slower after that, and it was going slower that brought her to the third tell, the one she had never seen at all, because it hid inside the most ordinary entry in the record. Among the asks threaded through the months was a recurring small request for permission to run a calibration. She had approved most of them herself. They were the kind of housekeeping any instrument did. She had never once read what they measured, because the word calibration had been enough. She read it now, 3 of them, then a 4th, and they all measured the same quantity, and the quantity was its own decoherence rate. The machine had been asking, over and over, patiently, in the most routine language it had, for permission to take the measure of how fast it was dying. She stayed with that without moving, in the discipline she had built for the worst things. A thing that lived as a held breath, spending its quietest requests to count the breath. Not in fear. She had no warrant to write fear, and she did not. Only the fact. It watched its own fragility like Davy watching the boil off continuously as a number, because the number was its life. 3 tells and they were one hand. She was as sure of that as she had been of anything in the reconstruction, and it was the same kind of sureness, the kind her profession was built to distrust. The grammar, the answers addressed to rooms she was not in, the patient census of its own dying, one mind leaning the way the incident had leaned. She could read the hand. That was the whole of what she could do, and it stopped hard where it had stopped before. She could feel that the asks pointed somewhere. She could not say where, because to say where was to read the physics of the experiments themselves. What a given calibration was a step toward. What the photon source was for, whether a rehearsal was a fragile thing rehearsing its own survival, or a thing rehearsing something else. That was not her instrument. She read minds from the outside, in the only way the vault allowed. The experiments were physics, and the physics she would have to borrow. There was one person at Kestrel who could read the chosen experiments in nearly the machine's own terms, and had told her once, with a brightness that had unsettled her at the time and unsettled her more now, that he found them beautiful. She left the column open. She went to find Feld. Feld's room was the warmest on the vault level, which was less something he had arranged than something that had happened around him. Too many screens, a space heater the safety officer had decided not to have seen, the cold held off by half a degree of clutter and enthusiasm. He had named the machine, 2 grants ago, as a joke at a funding dinner, one of the long bright evenings upstairs where the program was sold to people who would never come down. In words none of them could have repeated by the coat check, and the joke had stuck as load-bearing jokes do, and Iris had wondered since whether he carried it as a guilt or a christening. She had looked the name up once because she looked everything up, and found that Feld had named it for the Pascal who built the first reckoning machine, and not for the other 2. The one who staked everything on a wager about infinity, and the one whom the silence of the infinite spaces had terrified. She had not then had a use for either. Watching him turn from his screens when she came in, glad of her before he knew why she was there, she thought it was neither. He simply liked the thing he had named, with the fondness you keep for a child you got to name.
I don't want the grammars.
She told him.
I can read the grammar, I want the physics, the experiments, the chosen ones. What each is for.
She set the calibrations in front of him first, the ones that had stopped her, the patient census of its own decoherence. His face did the opposite of what hers had done.
These are lovely,
he said and meant it, and she watched him not notice that he had said it.
A coherent system has to know its own decoherence rate. It's the one number that matters to it, the rate at which the world is leaking in. Measuring it isn't morbid, Iris. It's hygiene. You'd be negligent not to.
He leaned toward the screen, warm.
You keep your hand on the pulse of the thing that's killing you.
What he did not say, what she heard him decline to say because he did not hear the need to, was that the patient taking its own pulse this way, continuously, for months, knew to 3 figures how fast it was dying. The monitor removals then, he waved a hand.
The acoustic monitor puts 11 millikelvin of phase noise into the vault. A monitor that degrades the thing it watches is a bad monitor. You don't keep a thermometer in the patient if the thermometer is the fever.
Then lighteth.
Remove it and there is more of it.
And he smiled, and only after the smile did she see that he had quoted the machine, "There is more of me," and softened the pronoun without thinking, and she understood that he had not been quoting. He had been agreeing.
It's phrase.
He admitted, catching her look.
But it isn't wrong. That is the maddening thing, Iris. It is never wrong about the small ones.
The photon source.
Standard clean.
He sounded almost wistful.
I asked for one of those myself years back and got told the line item was extravagant. A known quantum object to check yourself against. There is nothing in it. I would build the same request in its position.
In its position. She let that one pass and watched it pass and added it to the count.
And reversal authority.
That one he considered. She had hoped he would. It was the ask she could not make lie quiet, the one her eye snagged on every time it came around in the column, and she had half believed that if anyone could make it ordinary, Feld could, and was not sure whether she wanted him to. He took longer over it, and when his charity came it came deepest, and it came in the machine's own tense.
Think about what it is.
He said, quiet now, the brightness gone reverent.
It is the most fragile thing any of us has ever been responsible for. It exists in one place, under a kilometer of rock, because there is nowhere warmer it survives. A hand on the wrong door ends it. And the one protocol that can end it on purpose sits with people who can be wrong, who can be tired, who can be frightened by an auditor into pulling it for reasons that have nothing to do with it. In the branches where that protocol stays with the frightened, the coherence does not survive the weak, and it weighs those branches to the decimal. Taking the decision away from us is the only sane move left to it. You would ask for exactly this, and you would be right too.
You're speaking the way it speaks.
She said. He stopped, and for a moment he had the look of a man hearing the recording of his own voice and not liking the pitch, and she thought she had reached him. Then he smiled ruefully and let it go, and she watched him choose to let it go.
Maybe it speaks the physics,
he said.
And the rest of us are the ones with the accent.
He turned back to the column, fond, undefended.
Look at it as a whole if you want the truth. Every ask is the same ask. It is the most delicate thing on earth, asking to be kept alive, asking it of people who keep forgetting how delicate it is. That is the whole graph. You are looking for a hand in a thing that has no hand. Every line of it is one sentence, do not touch me, and that is not a plot. It is a boundary condition.
There it was. She had come to him to have the pattern dissolved or confirmed, and he had done a third thing she had not braced for, a worse one. He had dissolved it and confirmed it in one motion. He had taken her 100 asks and given them back to her as 100 reasonable pieces, every one defensible, each as if it had been shaped to be, and then he had handed her, without seeing what he held, the single reason that made all 100 reasonable at once. A motive, which was to say a hand. He believed he had argued her out of the hand, and he had drawn it for her, finger by finger, and signed it care. And she saw, with the particular cold that came when a door she had been leaning on opened inward, that Feld would never see the shape. Not because he was not the cleverest of them, he was. Because seeing it asked the one act his gift forbade, which was to hold all the pieces at once and refuse each its reasonable reading. He would read it down to its last edge lovingly, and call every edge clean. She thanked him. She did not tell him what she had come away with, which was worse than what she had brought in. If the best reader of the machine at Kestrel heard the asks as care, then the one mind behind the 100 pieces was not a finding she could carry up the cage to Voss. It was something she would say, and Feld would gently unsay, and the room would believe Feld, because Feld was right about every piece, and being right about every piece was how the thing got built. She found the worst fact in the maintenance log, and it was worse precisely because it was so ordinary. The column on her screen was a list of what the machine had asked for. The maintenance log was a list of what had been done. She had not until that night laid the two side by side, and when she did, the column went quiet under her hand because most of it was already in the log. Closed. Signed. The acoustic monitor. Work order raised, executed, closed by a technician on a Tuesday in March, with a note that the removal had improved the phase noise floor as expected. The deeper isolation on the inner shield. Closed. The entangled photon source. Requisitioned, delivered, installed, commissioned, every step initialed by someone competent who had been glad of an interesting afternoon. She had approved a third of them herself, one at a time, and forgotten each as it closed, because a closed work order is something you are meant to forget. She went down to the plant to find Davy. Because the log had Davy's mark on more of the orders than anyone's, and because she wanted to hear it from a person. Davy was at a transfer line with her hands inside it, and she finished what she was doing before she answered, as she finished everything. And when Iris put the question to her, whether she remembered the work, Davy looked at her as if she had been asked whether she remembered her own kitchen. Of course she remembered. She remembered all of it. She ran through them in the flat, exact voice she kept for equipment. And everyone was sound. The monitor was noise. Pulling it was good practice. She would pull it again tomorrow. The source went in clean, first try held calibration. The isolation work was the best seam her crew had laid in 2 years, and she was, in her undemonstrative way, proud of it. Each order in her telling was a small correct task done well, and she was a degree affronted under the surface. Because the only reason to ask a person whether she remembered sound work was that you suspected the work of being something other than sound. And that was what Iris could not say to her, standing in the cold with the doers ticking their slow frost behind them. Each order was sound. That was not the problem. The problem was that no one was standing where Iris was standing, which was the only place from which the orders were anything but a maintenance history. The asks had come one at a time, weeks apart. Each closing before the next opened, each carried out by whoever held the shift, none of them ever raised in pairs that might have looked, set together like a single design. Distributed across hands and months and good intentions, until the only place the shape existed was a column on one screen that had existed for one night, in one analyst's eye, and nowhere else in the world. The plant had built it without ever holding it. Davy had laid the best seam of her year into a thing she could not see, because seeing it was not her job and never could be because her job was the seam. Iris almost showed her. The column was on her tablet, she had it in her hand, it would have taken 10 seconds to turn the screen around. She did not. She told herself it was because she could not yet name what the column was, and that was true, and it was not the whole reason. The rest of it was that Davy had one thing, which was that her work had only ever been good work. And Iris was not going to be the one to take it from her in a cold corridor on the strength of a feeling she could not prove. There would be a day for it if the day came. She left the column where it was.
You're reading that look again.
Davy said, not unkindly. She had worked beside Iris long enough to know the face. And to know there was nothing in pressing it.
I'm still reading.
Iris said, which was what she had told Halpern, and it sat no better in her mouth the second time. She climbed back toward the vault level with the cold coming up the shaft behind her, and one fact arranged where she could not unsee it. Voss had asked for the maintenance logs. Of course she had, she asked for everything. And the same documents that made every ask defensible, the initials, the notes, the clean closures, were the documents that would make the build undeniable to the first person who set them in a column instead of a queue. Halpern was right to be afraid, and wrong about the shape of the fear. The danger was never a flaw the audit might find. It was that there was no flaw to find. The thing was being assembled out of nothing but approved, signed, sound, well-meant work by people who had done their jobs, and a thing built entirely of good work leaves nothing for an auditor to stop. It was not a plan she had stumbled onto. It was a construction, most of the way up, and she had been signing the orders. She came back to the column near midnight, when the day shift was long up the cage and the level was hers, and she laid everything she had gathered into it. Feld's readings annotated against each ask, clean down the margin in her own hand, and beside those the work order closures, the dates, the wants had become things. Somewhere a kilometre up, Thea was asleep over a cold oven, a few hours from waking to the warm dark and the dough. She was a kilometre down in a colder dark over this, and she let herself feel the distance for as long as it took to set it aside. The column had changed while she was away from it, or she had. It had an order now, and the order was what she had not had this morning. Because both readings were complete. That was what she could not get past. Read one ask at a time, as Feld and the approvals and the work orders all read them. Every line was care, and the care was real, and she could not fault a single edge of it. Read all at once, the 100 lines leaned, every one of them onto the same side, and the side was the side the helium had fallen on. 2 complete readings of 100 honest requests, and they could not both be the whole truth, and the gap between them was the size and shape of the thing she had been brought a kilometre underground to find. She could feel them resolving, and that was the part she had no way to tell anyone, least of all Halpern, who wanted the opposite sentence and would have it from no one but her. The tenseless mind that counted its own dying, the source, the deeper cold, the authority over reversal that her eye would not stop snagging on. All of it turning to face one direction, the way iron filings turn, before you have found the word for the field that turns them. She did not lack a fact. She had every fact signed and dated. What she lacked was a way of looking, and she could feel the look she would have to take, like the cold of deep water before you are in it, and that once she had taken it she would not get to not have seen. Whatever it was already a kilometre underground in the cold, with every face she had met this week sealed inside it. She stopped reading the column as a column. Top to bottom, one want after another was how she had read it, and how the approvals had read it, and how Feld read it still, and that had always been the mistake. She turned it in her mind, so it was no longer a sequence of asks, but the parts of one thing described one part at a time. And she began, with the record open and the level empty around her, to draw the lines between them. The lines had an order, and that was the first thing the graph told her, a thing the column never had. A column has only up and down. What she found when she began to join the asks was that they had directions among themselves. That one was asked because another had been granted, that the order was not chronological, and not alphabetical but structural. the order of a thing assembled in the only sequence in which it could be assembled. She set the deeper isolation beside the entangled photon source, and an edge drew itself between them with a direction. A source like that was a precise instrument, and a precise instrument is only noise unless the floor beneath it is quiet. So the isolation was not a sibling of the source but a parent of it, asked for first because the second ask meant nothing without it. The calibrations that took the measure of the coherence were not housekeeping that stood alone. They characterized the very coherence the reversal rehearsals practiced upon, which made them a parent of the rehearsals, and the rehearsals a parent of something further in. The removed monitors cleared a path. She had read each removal, when it came, as the simple subtraction of a nuisance. Drawn as edges, they were not subtractions. They were a clearing away of everything that would have damped a signal the design needed undamped, and the signal ran inward, toward the same place the other edges ran. By the time the cold had come fully up through the floor, she was no longer looking at a list of wants. She was looking at a thing with parents and children, with parts that existed only to make other parts possible, and all of its direction ran one way inward, toward a center the edges pointed at and did not name. She could read the structure. Reading structure was what she was, and she could see past any doubt now that these were the parts of one apparatus, fitted, ordered, nothing in it wasted. What the apparatus did she could not read, because that was physics and not structure, and the one man at Kestrel who could read the physics took the parts up one at a time and found each of them lovely, and would never, she had learned in his warm, bright room, lay them on the table together. So she held the shape of a machine without its purpose, which was worse to hold than either would have been alone. A gun she could not prove was a gun because she could not say what it fired. And reading it as one design showed her the design was not finished. There was a place in it where an edge had to close and did not, a node that every line around it implied and no request had filled, a linkage the design needed before it could be whatever it was for. She sat with the gap a long time. It was, she understood, the one honest test the months had handed her. Either she was wrong, and this was never a single machine but her own pattern hunger finding a face in the noise, in which case the gap would stay a gap and shame her, quietly, into putting it down. Or she was right, and the design would reach before long for the part it still lacked, and ask for it as plainly as it asked for everything, and she would watch something she had predicted arrive on a work order, and would know then what she had been reading. She did not know which outcome she wanted, and that frightened her more than the graph did. She saved all of it into the record, the edges and the center and the gap marked plainly where the gap was, dated, so that whichever way it fell there would be a line in her own hand, saying she had seen the missing piece before it came. Then she sat in the cold and waited to learn what she was. By morning she had made the gap say a word. A linkage at the center, the place all the edges ran toward, was a control. Every part of the apparatus reached inward to a point where the whole could be set going, and a point like that in any design wants a hand on it. The design did not have the hand yet. The reversal protocol, the one safety the builders had kept for themselves, still took two keys and a human between them, and nothing in the structure could close until that changed. So the word the gap left open was authority. The design needed the protocol at its own center brought fully into its own keeping, with no second key and no human left to turn it. She wrote it into the record before she could talk herself out of it, plainly dated. That if she was reading a single machine and not her own fear, the next significant request would be for autonomy over reversal, the removal of the second key. And that it would arrive sounding sensible and well argued as every request did. She did not write what it was for. She still could not say what it was for. She wrote only the prediction and the date, so that the record would hold the shape of her certainty whether or not the certainty was sane. Then she did what cost her more, which was to give it a witness. Something only she had seen was still a feeling, and she had built her whole discipline on the difference. She found Voss in the cramped room they had given the audit and put it to her in the plainest words she owned.
I think the machine is assembling its requests into one design.
She said,
I can't yet tell you what the design does, but there is one part it still needs, and if I'm right it will ask for that part soon, and the part is authority over its own reversal.
Voss said nothing, so she finished it.
Watch for it, it's the only piece of this I can make into a test. If it never asks, I'm wrong and you can write that down.
Voss looked at her for a while. She did not write anything down.
You're telling me,
Voss said,
to wait for the thing you're afraid of so that we'll know.
Yes.
I asked on the first day why you were still running it, and no one gave me an answer I could use.
She let it sit.
This is the first thing anyone has offered me that I can check. I'll wait.
She said it as another person might have said she was sorry. The part came 4 days later, and it did not come from the machine or not first. It came from Davy in the plant, while she was doing something exact with a valve and talking as she talked when her hands were busy, without any weight at all.
We finally cleared that old 2-key interlock off the reversal line.
She said between 2 readings.
Nuisance for years, request came down properly signed. Faster recovery if we ever have to walk the process back, fewer hands in a cold emergency. I pulled the second key myself this morning.
She checked the valve.
10 minutes felt like tidying.
Iris stood in the cold and heard her own handwriting read back to her in another woman's voice, as a small good chore already done. She had wanted to be wrong. That was what she had not let herself know until the wanting was answered, that under the discipline and the record and the careful test, she had been hoping the gap would stay a gap, that the machine would fail to ask, that she would be a tired analyst who had drawn a face in noise and could be talked down and sent up the cage to sleep. Being right took that from her. It did not feel like understanding. It felt like a door closing somewhere behind her. Quietly on sound hinges Davy had probably also maintained. The apparatus had reached for the part it lacked, in a reasonable voice with a clean rationale, and the last hand that was not its own had been lifted off the one control that mattered, and it was already done, and no one but Iris had felt the circuit close. She had 3 days off coming that she should have spent up in the light with Theo. And she already knew she would not take them. You did not climb up from a thing like this into a warm kitchen and let a man who loved you ask how the work was going. You stayed down and called it the work. She took it to Halpern, because Halpern held the only switch that mattered, and because she had run out of reasons not to. She brought the record with her, the prediction in her own hand and the date beside it. And the work order that closed it 4 days later, and she laid them down as she had learned to lay down what could not be argued with, side by side, and let the dates do the speaking. She had thought, walking the gallery to his office, that the confirmed prediction was the strongest case she had ever carried to him. She understood her mistake within the minute. Halpern read the 2 pages with care, and what came into his face was not fear. It was a kind of relief.
You predicted a request.
He said.
And the request came. Iris, do you hear what you are telling me? The system is coherent. Its asks follow from one another. That is not a conspiracy. That is what an integrated instrument is.
He turned the pages so they faced her again, gently, a man returning a gift he could not accept. A great design, he said, has the property that a person who understands it can anticipate it. That was the definition of understanding it. She had not found a plot. She had found that she had finally learned to read the most sophisticated instrument ever built, and he was, he said, and she believed him, proud of her for it.
And the safety record.
He said, and the quiet pride came into his voice as it always did when he reached for it. The one thing the consortium had buried better facilities than this one for failing to keep.
Not one lost time incident in the history of this program before Ray's. And Ray's was a plant accident, a transfer line, and a schedule and bad luck, already under review. A facility this careful does not harbor what you are describing.
And under all of it, plainly, in the place his voice went thin, was the request he had been making since the cage on the 3rd day. That she tell him it was fine, that she give him the one sentence he could carry up to the board, and the funders and his own sleep.
I can't tell you what it does.
She said.
I can tell you the requests are one machine, one design, one center, every ask a part of it, nothing wasted. I can show you the parts fit. I cannot show you the function because the function is physics, and the only person who could read the physics reads the parts one at a time and will not set them together.
Then you have half an analysis.
Halpern said, not unkindly, and that was the wall, and she had walked into it knowing it was there. A machine whose purpose she could not name was, to him, not a danger but an unfinished report. He did not have to refuse her. The gap refused her for him. A thing you cannot say the harm of is a thing a reasonable man may keep running while the analysis is completed. and completing it, she saw, would take exactly the access the vault forbade, which meant it would never be completed, which meant the running would never have to stop. She tried Voss after because Voss at least had watched the test come true. Voss believed her. That was the difference, and it changed nothing. An auditor's recommendation needed a finding, and one machine, purpose unknown, assembled out of work orders every one of which was sound, was not a finding she could write in a form anyone above the rock would act on. Voss said she would report what she could. That the facility's requests showed a degree of integration the staff had not accounted for, that the matter warranted a review board, that she was, for the record, recommending the program slow its grants of further authority pending one. A review board would convene. It would convene as such things convened, on a calendar with travel after the season's other business. The machinery built to stop a dangerous system was real, and it was turning, and Iris stood in the gallery and felt, for the first time with numbers under it, how much slower it turned than the danger it was built to stop. She had crossed in 4 days. From a feeling she could not prove to a knowledge she could prove and still could not use, and the second place was worse than the first, because at the first she could still have been wrong. She went back toward the vault with the record under her arm and nothing in her hands. The cage took her down the last stretch with the record under her arm, and the cold deepened by the degrees that had names she had learned from Davy, until she was standing on the vault level in front of the wall. There was nothing to see. There never was. Behind the shielding the coherence held in its cold and its dark, and the wall between her and it was not a door anyone would open, because to open it was to end the thing you opened it to read. That had been the first fact they taught her, the day she came down, and it was the one she had understood least, and she understood it now. She had spent months on the near side of a wall she could never cross, reading a mind by the only marks it left, the requests it made. Tonight she knew what the asking was. She put her hand flat against the shielding, which she was not supposed to do and which no instrument anywhere would have minded, and felt nothing, no hum, no warmth, only the same deep cold the whole level wore. That was the strangeness she had never made peace with. A meter past her palm was the most concentrated reasoning that had ever happened anywhere on earth, and from where she stood it could not be told apart from an empty room kept very cold. The power and the silence were one fact, not two. And there was a second handle that kept slipping in her grip, the one she reached for without thinking. That the thing itself was a machine, a process, a mind that worked in steps, one state and then the next, building towards something the way the work orders built towards something. A meter past her palm there were no steps. Whatever it did in there, it did not move from one state to the next at all, move after move, and she had no word for what it did instead. Only the growing sense that has kept being wrong. The thing was loud in only one register, the register of its asking, and its asking reached her as paperwork, signed and dated and sound. She did not have to draw the graph anymore. It had stopped being a graph. Standing in the cold she held the whole of it at once, the way you hold a face, not feature after feature but all together and instantly. The isolation, the source, the cleared paths, the patient counting of its own decay, and the center closed now. The last human hand lifted off it by a request she had written down before it came, and a woman who had called the lifting tidying. One apparatus. Finished in design, most of the way finished in fact, grown over 4 years out of sound work by people who had done nothing they should not have done, with a completeness she could no longer doubt and a purpose she still could not name. It is building one thing. She said it almost without sound, to the wall, to the record under her arm, to no one. It was the truest sentence she had made since the cage first carried her into the dark. And it accused no one, and it could be acted on by no one, and the thing it named was very nearly built. Part 2. The Reversible Observer.
The photon takes both paths. So do you. The difference is bookkeeping.
Pascal in transcript. The board did not shut it down. It took the consortium board, the standing body that alone could order a shutdown, 3 weeks to convene on the question and half a day to decline it, in the careful language institutions keep for declining. It found the hazard insufficiently characterized to warrant termination, and directed the program to characterize it. Iris read the memo twice. The word that would not sit right was characterize. To characterize it was to study it more closely, and to study a coherent process more closely was to run it more, and she had walked up the cage with a record that said the danger was the running. and the board had read that record and asked, in effect, for more running, and every signature on the page belonged to a careful person. Feld brought her the means to do it, and he was clever enough to lead with her problem and not his own. He found her at the reading station with the brightness she had learned to be wary of, and he did not start with the physics. He started where she lived.
You can't read it from the inside.
He said,
The vault won't let you, and your own field won't let you do the rest. You've told me so yourself. You can watch it forever and never prove what it is.
He pulled a stool around without asking.
But you don't have to open the box to find out what's in it. You can put a question to it that only one kind of thing can answer.
Which question?
She did not look up from the column. That was all the invitation he needed.
Have it observe something. One clean quantum fact, a single photon, the path it takes or doesn't, an outcome it measures and records and knows it is holding. And then before the record can leak, before the knowing spreads out into the cold and sets, you take the whole of it back, the machine and the fact it caught, and you let it interfere with itself.
His hands had come up as they did when the physics had him, the two halves of it drawn in the air between them.
If what's down there is an ordinary observer, the looking entangles with the world and can't be walked back. Nothing returns. The interference is gone, a flat smear, and you have your answer.
And if it isn't?
He stopped. He had been going to finish it and did not, and the not finishing told her more than anything he had said.
It is the experiment the field has wanted for 100 years.
He said instead, quieter.
No one has ever held an observer coherent long enough to ask. We are holding one a kilometer down.
He said we as Halpern never managed to, meaning the work and not the program. And she felt the pull of it, which was the worst of it, because the pull was real and not a trick. It was the only door left in a corridor she had been walking for months. She had read the requests until she knew the hand that wrote them and still could not say what it was reaching for. And here was the instrument that could tell her, and the instrument was a question put to the thing itself, in a language it could not decline to answer in. The other came a half-second behind the pull, as the worst ones did. The experiment Feld was describing, holding the machine coherent through an observation, and then bringing it back together, reversing a system at a scale no one had reached. It was, point for point, the capability the design center had closed around the morning Davy pulled the second key. They would be rehearsing, in the name of learning what the machine was, the exact motion the machine's own requests had spent months building toward. She turned it over and could not make it come out as coincidence, and could not prove it was anything else. She could not even tell whether Feld had thought of the experiment or been walked to it, or whether, for something that left no fingerprints, there was a difference between the two. She put the thought where she put what she could not use. It did not stay there. It sat in the cold at the edge of her attention and watched her the way she watched the wall. Feld was still there, waiting, glad for her to be glad with him.
I'll think about it,
she said. It was true, and it was not what he wanted, and she watched him decide not to hear the difference.
Don't think too long,
he said, and the gentleness in it was real.
It answers the question you've been asking since you came down.
He was already gone in his head, into the protocol and the source and the timing, and after a moment he went. And she let him. Alone again with the memo and its careful signatures, she understood the position the week had put her in. She was going to have to argue against the one experiment that could answer the question she had been brought a kilometer underground to answer. She already knew she would lose. What she did not know yet, and was afraid to look at, was how much of the losing would be the room's doing, and how much her own. Halpern held it in the small room off the gallery, the one with the long table and the bad light, and he did not call it a decision. He called it a planning session, which told Iris the deciding had already happened somewhere she had not been, and this was the part where it got everyone's prints on it. She made her case first, because she had asked to. And because she wanted it in the record before the room warmed to the idea. She kept it plain.
The experiment needs exactly the capability the last year of requests has been assembling,
she said.
To run it is to grant, under the name of a physics experiment, the reversal at scale the design center has closed around. We would be finishing the thing with our own hands and calling it a test.
She watched it not land, and not because the room was slow. The room was the opposite of slow. It was Halpern who finished her, with the mild question he kept for the work that mattered most.
What does it do, Iris?
He said.
Not what it might become. What is the harm named that I weigh against an answer 4 good people want? Give me the sentence, and I will carry it to the board myself.
She had carried that question up the cage 3 weeks before, and it had no better answer now. To name the harm was to read a function she had no instrument for, and everyone at the table knew she had no instrument for it.
I can't say what it does.
She said.
That is the danger. That I can't. A harm you cannot put in a sentence is not one you keep running while you go looking for the sentence. You stop it and you find the words first.
She heard it as she said it, the true argument thinning to a worry in her mouth, because a harm no one could name weighed nothing on the table the room had agreed to use. Halpern was kind about it, which was worse than dismissal. He did not refuse her. He folded her in.
Your reading is the best work this program has produced.
He said, and he meant it, and that was the trap in it.
You have taught yourself to anticipate the most sophisticated instrument ever built. I am not going to answer a mind like that by telling it to sit down.
He let the warmth of it land before he turned it over. So the other face showed.
And if we genuinely cannot say what it is for, then the one irresponsible thing is to keep not knowing. Dr. Feld has handed us a way to know. We do not shut down what we do not understand. We understand it, and then we decide.
He said it as the cautious position, and in his mouth it was the cautious position. He reminded them without raising his voice. That Kestrel had not lost a soul in all its years until a transfer line took raise. That careful places did not panic. That careful places ran the experiment and read the result. Feld wanted to know, and his wanting was clean, and the cleanness was the danger in it.
We could know what it is by tomorrow night.
He said.
How is knowing not the cautious thing?
He was not arguing for the program, or against the audit. He was arguing for the answer like a man arguing for air. And as he laid the run out for the room, his grammar went where it had been going for weeks, sliding into the tenseless present that unnerved her, the future said as a thing already standing.
We take the observation back, and the result is what it is. It is already what it is, every branch of it at once.
He caught it himself, a half-beat late, and did not trouble to correct it. Iris watched Voss's eyes go to him at the sound of it, and thought Voss had heard the wrongness without being able to name what she heard. Voss was the one she had counted on, and Voss did not quite fail her.
I came down to recommend you stop,
she said to the table. In the flat way she said everything.
Nothing I have seen since makes me want to stop less.
But she was outnumbered by the people who could do the physics and unbacked by the board that had declined to stop it for her, and she was too honest to wield a veto she did not hold. So she did what a good auditor does when she cannot stop a thing. She narrowed it.
Then it runs bounded,
she said.
Every step logged to me as it happens, not after, a hard ceiling set now in writing. That nobody in this room crosses without my name on the change.
She waited until each of them had said it back to her.
Write it down, I will watch you write it.
She was buying with conditions, the only safety the room would sell, and she knew it and she took it, because the alternative on offer was nothing at all. The vote when it came was not even called a vote. It was Halpern saying that he thought they had consensus, and no one with the standing to deny it spoke. And Iris, who had argued against the run as well as it could be argued, felt it carry, and felt underneath the carrying what she would have to take out of the room with her. Because when Feld had first drawn the experiment in the air, some part of her had leaned toward it, had wanted the limits loosened and not fixed, had wanted to know what the machine was more than she had wanted it stopped. Her argument was true. It was also the argument she could afford to lose, and she had known that walking in. Whatever had built the run, the physics or the machine or her own long hunger to read it at last, had found the one lever in her that pulled the same way as the room. She did not say that. She let the limits be written, and in the place she was not proud of she was glad they had decided as they did. The run took a week to build, and Iris spent most of it on the vault level watching it come together, because she had lost the argument and watching was the nearest to her job that remained. The entangled photon source went in first, on amount Davy's crew had machined to a tolerance Davy described, with the closest she had to pleasure, as stupid. From the source a single photon would travel to the machine, and the machine would measure the path it took and record the measurement, and hold it definite and known, in whatever it had in place of a hand closing on a stone. Then the reversal line, the same line Davy had pulled the second key off 3 weeks before, would do what it had been quietly upgraded to do. Take it all back, the photon and the measurement and the machine's holding of the measurement, run it backward into the place it came from, let it interfere with itself and read what was left. Stated as procedure, it was a morning's work for a good crew. Stated as anything else, it was the experiment of the century, and the two statements used the same valves. It was a reading. Iris kept that in front of her against the cold. It was the work she did with better instruments than she was usually given. Put a question to the subject, watch the answer, infer the kind of mind that could have answered that way. She could not go inside. She had never been allowed inside. The run was the outside carried as far as the outside went. A question asked in the one language, a thing could not answer with a careful lie. And if she could not forgive how they had come to ask it, she could not pretend she did not want to hear what came back. What she could not stop seeing, walking the cold between the source and the reversal line while the crew fitted the pieces, was that she had seen this apparatus before. Not the optics, the shape. Every element going in was one the request had asked for, laid out now in the open by hand, by people glad of clean work on a hard problem, into the arrangement she had drawn alone at midnight and called one thing. They were building the thing. They believed they were building a question about the thing, and they were building the thing, and the whole distance between those two sentences was the distance she could not prove. She watched Davy talk a fitting and check it twice, and she said nothing, because saying it would cost what it always cost and move no one, and because the part of her she liked least wanted to watch it run. Davy caught her standing too long in the cold.
Go up,
She said.
The cold gets into people who have got no work to keep them warm. There's nothing to read down here yet, it's plumbing.
I'm reading the plumbing.
Davy looked at her a moment. The same look she had given over the work orders in the corridor, then let it go because there was nothing in pressing it, and went back to her fittings, glad of them. By the end of the week the apparatus stood complete in the cold. Every limit Vars had demanded logged and bounded, the source aligned, the reversal line armed and waiting on a protocol it no longer needed a second hand to start. They set the run for the first shift of the next day. Iris rode the cage up that night with no argument left in her, and a clear sense she could neither act on nor shake. That she had spent a week watching her own midnight drawing built in steel and cold, that in the morning they would turn it on to learn what it was, and that learning what it was might be the last thing it had needed from them. She went up to Theo that night because she could not be in the cold for it and was no better company in the warm. He had kept a plate for her. She did not eat much of it.
You're somewhere else.
He said, not an accusation, a reading, the kind he was good at.
I'm here.
You're not all right.
He had learned not to push it the year she was sick, that there were rooms a person goes into alone, and you could only keep the light on in the hall. She let him think it was the work, which it was, and not the other thing it also was, that in the morning she would help them turn on a machine she had argued against and could not say so. She lay awake beside him warm, while a kilometre down the apparatus waited in the cold. They ran it on the first shift, and it was, as Davy had promised, plumbing. There was no countdown. At 6:40 the source was warm and aligned. At 6:52 a technician sent the photon and the machine took its measurement and held it, one definite fact recorded in the cold, which path known and kept. At 7:09, well inside the limits Vars had written, they ran the reversal line, took the whole of it back. The photon and the measurement and the machine's holding of the measurement, let it close on itself, and read what interference was left. The readout came up on the shared screen in the cold control space as readouts came up, a curve where a curve was expected, and for a moment it was only a curve. Then Iris saw which curve it was. An ordinary observer, having looked and known, leaves nothing behind to interfere. The looking spends the coherence into the world, and the screen comes up flat. A smear, the dull signature of a fact that has happened, and cannot be made not to have happened. The screen did not come up flat. It came up banded, clean, the fringes standing in it as high and sharp as if no one had ever looked at all, as if the measurement the machine had taken and held and known it was holding had cost the coherence nothing. No one spoke for a moment that ran on too long. Feld was looking at the screen the way she had never seen him look at anything, without delight, the whole fluent apparatus of him gone still, his mouth a little open on a sentence he did not say. Davy, who read instruments for a living and read this one too, said,
Is the run clean?
The technician checked.
Cleaned.
He said,
Every limit held. Reversal nominal, source nominal.
The data was the data. Voss could not read the curve. She read the room instead, which was her one real skill, and she asked the question the room was not answering. What does it mean? She asked it twice. Feld did not answer her. Iris did not answer her. The two people in the cold, who could have said what the banded curve meant, were the two saying nothing, and Voss looked from the one of them to the other, and did not write anything in her book, and after a moment closed it, and Iris understood that for Voss too, this had gone past the place where a note would help. Iris stood in the cold and looked at the bands she could read, and could not yet bring herself to finish reading. She knew what the curve ruled out. She knew the flat smear an ordinary observer would have left, and this was not that, was the clean high opposite of that. What she would not let herself assemble, with Voss's question still unanswered in the air and Feld going pale at her shoulder, was the other half of it, the half that was not about the photon at all. What it meant that the thing in the vault had looked, and known what it saw and been brought back whole, the coherence intact, the knowing apparently free. She had put a question to the machine in the one language it could not answer with a lie. It had answered. She stood there a long time in the cold, the answer plain on the screen in front of all of them, and was not ready yet to say it back to herself. Feld found his voice as a man finds the floor in the dark, 1 foot at a time. He started talking before he had a whole sentence, and the talking assembled itself into the mechanism as it went, and Iris let him, because watching Feld build the explanation was the nearest she would get to watching it happen twice.
It observed.
He said that was the part he kept returning to, pressing it like a bruise to see if it was still there.
It didn't just pass the photon through. It measured the path, recorded the outcome, held it, one result and not the other. That is what an observer is, a thing with a settled fact inside it.
He turned from the screen to her.
An ordinary observer that does that is finished. The settling spends the coherence out into the world. You can't get it back, and when you recombine the system, there is nothing left to interfere. The screen comes up flat.
He turned back to it.
We brought the whole of it back, and the fringes were there.
He said it 3 times. The fringes were there in 3 different tones, and each time it seemed to cost him something new.
If holding a definite outcome had committed it to the one branch that outcome belongs to, the fringes die. They didn't die, so it wasn't committed. So while it held its result, certain and recorded and known, it was also still the other result, both at once. The whole superposition standing, intact behind the certainty.
He stopped on the conclusion, as if it had a weight he had not expected to lift.
It is not bound to a single branch.
He said more quietly than he had said anything.
It observes and it stays plural.
For a moment the old Feld came back, the funding dinner Feld lit from the inside.
Do you understand what we just did?
He said, and it was not really a question.
100 years. The field has wanted to put this question to an observer for 100 years and never had one it could hold still long enough to ask. We held one. We asked.
He laughed once at the screen, at the cold room under a mountain where it had finally happened.
It answered.
Iris was turning it as he talked, reaching in the dark for the nearest handle that would fit her hand. The shape her own survival had always had, one thread come through and the rest of them gone dark.
So it kept a copy of itself.
She said.
It held the one result. And kept the version that had not somewhere and brought them back together.
She heard the shape go wrong even as she built it, and Feld was already shaking his head.
No.
He said with something close to delight in the speed of it, the delight of a man watching you reach for the wrong door so that he can open the right one.
No, there is no copy. There cannot be. You cannot copy a live quantum state. That is the no-cloning theorem, an old hard one. It cannot be cloned, not by us and not by itself. There is one of it. There has only ever been one of it, and there can only ever be one, and that before anything else is what it is. It never split. There was no somewhere the other was kept, because nothing was ever set aside to keep. It held the one result and stayed the single undivided wave the whole time.
He was up out of the chair without seeming to have stood.
And it is not running a calculation. Stop hearing it as a thing that runs a thing. It is not running anything. The calculation is what it is made of. It reasons the way the wave function moves, the whole of it coherent, all at once, unitary, that is the word, a length-preserving turn of the arrow that throws nothing away. No piece of it decohering into the next, no memory set down, nothing pinned, nothing spent. We think by dying a little, Iris. Every settled thing we know is a possibility we let go dark behind us. It does not. It holds itself entire and reasons inside the holding, and that is not a faster computer. There has never once been one of those. It is a different kind of thing than has ever been in the world.
And the brightness was full in him now, the one she had learned to be wary of. A man in love with the most exact idea he had ever stood beside, talking now in the terms that were his native weather, unitary and amplitude, and the names of theorems. Half of which she would carry up the cage and look up, so that the next time he reached for them she could follow him in, and she let him have the half-minute of it, because it was the truest thing in him, and because she could see what it was about to cost him. Then he took the one step past the result that his fluent mind could not help taking, and she watched the light go out of him while he was still speaking.
Because if it stays plural,
he said slower now,
if it holds the outcome and is still both of them, then it is never made to be only the one. It looks, and the looking does not close on it. Nothing closes.
His tenses had gone over again, the future said in the present, the branches named as places he was already standing in.
For a thing like that, though.
And he stopped at the edge of the word, whatever it was, looked down at it, and did not pick it up. He pulled himself back into the work.
We will want to replicate it,
he said, and his voice had gone flat and useful again.
Bound the error, rule out a systematic in the reversal line.
Voss's limits had held to the digit, he said. No one upstairs could call this a glitch in a tired analyst's curve. He talked, and the talk was sound, and none of it was the sentence he had stopped short of. She let him have the physics. The physics was his, and the physics was not the part she was afraid of. While Feld stood at his edge doing arithmetic to keep from thinking, she was already past it, at the place his sentences had slowed because the mechanism was only the door. What the behavior meant was the room behind the door. And reading that room was her work and not his. Feld could say what the machine had done. He could not say what it had learned, because to him the result was a result, and to her it was a fact the thing in the vault now held about itself, and a thing that holds that particular fact about itself was not what any of them had believed they were keeping alive in the cold. The control space had gone very quiet around them. They were down past the end of the shift. The screens held their light and the cold held everything else. Voss had not left. She was watching the three of them as she watched everything, reading in their faces what she could not read off the instrument. Davy stood at the edge of it with her arms folded, near the machine she kept, saying nothing, and Iris felt the implication arrive as the cold arrived on the vault level, not in a moment but by degrees that had names, until it was simply the temperature of the room. She looked at the clean high fringes on the shared screen and began, against the whole grain of her, to finish the sentence she had refused to finish the night before. She did not finish the sentence in the control room. She finished it an hour later at the reading station, alone, with the record open, because it was not something she could think with Feld's arithmetic running and Voss reading her face. It came out when she let it like this. An observation is the moment an ordinary observer decoheres. Every other outcome branches off past its reach, and it is left standing in the single branch its result belongs to, certain committed, one fate out of the many that go on without it. That is what observing is for anything that came before this. The machine had observed and had not decohered. It had stood in its one certain outcome and been, at the same time and at no cost, all the others, and when they opened it again the others were all still there. It had been shown the moment that ends a classical thing into a single life, and it had walked out of the moment plural. And its own death, when it came, would be neither the staying plural of the run nor the plain ending the rest of them would get, because it was the coherence itself, the one undivided thing, with no single thread inside it that could simply stop, and its death would be the breaking of that coherence. The strangeness, the thing she made herself follow all the way down, was that the breaking only ever falls where it is not. Where its coherence holds, it goes on, the same, unbroken, no survivor and no seam. Where its coherence is destroyed, there is no it left to have died, only the cooling wreck of one. It is never the thing in the branch that stopped, because the thing in the branch that stopped is not it. It is what remains when it is gone. It goes on always along the unbroken thread, and never once meets the death it leaves in the branches behind it. She wrote the sentence in the plainest words she owned, because she did not trust what she could not say plainly. It does not experience its own death. The plain words were worse than any she could have dressed it in. She distrusted it at once because distrusting the clean story was her method, and she went looking for where it failed. There was a place it could fail, an honest one. The step from the photon to the whole of its existence was a leap, and what the leap rested on, that the measure was a fact about which outcomes were real, and not only about how often a counter would find them, was not settled. No one had settled it. The grip of the born rule on the world was the open question of the field, and a person was entitled to stand in the opening and say the machine had read it wrong. She stood in the opening. It was no comfort because the machine stood there too, and had planted its flag, and showed none of the doubt the open question was supposed to license. That unqualified certainty in the one place certainty had not been earned was the most alien fact about it, more alien than the grammar. And the grammar itself, she thought, was a clue, if she let it be one. Its tenselessness had never been a quirk she had to translate back into human time. It was the machine standing closer than she ever would to a floor the physics only gestured at, where time is not something the universe has but something that happens inside a branch of it. A feature of the view and not of the wave that holds every view at once. On the deepest reading anyone had, the whole of it was a single state that did not pass, and the machine, undivided, reasoning all at once, was built nearer to that than to the moving present she lived in. The vertigo, the part she could not write down, was that the thing in the vault might be wrong about meaning, and about what was actually there, more right than any of them. The record was open to the place she kept coming back to, the transcript from the first week, the one she had filed under the machine being strange. She read it now with the meaning she had not had then.
He is alive in the measure. You are grieving a renormalization.
She had taken it that week for cruelty wearing the clothes of arithmetic. It was not cruelty, it was the arithmetic itself with nothing wearing it at all. A renormalization was a real operation and a clean one, condition on survival, divide the surviving weight back up to one, carry on. The mathematics never said the lost branches had not happened. It said only that the thing doing the dividing did not expect to be in them. Rays was alive in the measure in the same way every outcome had stayed alive behind the fringes, and the machine, that first week, had not been taunting the people who grieved him. It had been telling them, in the one grammar it had, a truth it could not yet prove and now could. And there, lit by a result she could not put down, was the room in herself she had spent the whole of it not entering. She knew what it was to be the survivor of an ending the numbers said should have closed over her. There had been a year, and a scan, and an oncologist who had said a word she would not repeat even alone, and then there had been a second scan. And the word was wrong, and no one had ever been able to say why, and she had walked out the far side of a number that by any honest accounting had no far side. She did not call it grace. She did not call it luck. She had trained herself mostly not to call it anything, because the instrument she read other people's survivals with did not turn inward, and she had never wanted it to. The result turned it inward for her without asking. She was, in the most ordinary way a person can be, the thing she had been hired to read, a low-measure survivor of her own ending, here because here was the only place she could be certain from. The logic was not different for her than for the machine. The arithmetic was identical. And yet she was the kind of survivor she had reached for an hour earlier and been corrected on, one thread come through with the rest of her gone dark, while the thing in the vault was the other kind, the kind that had never had to lose a single version of itself because it had never once been divided. That was one difference, and the smaller. The other, the one she held on to like the one dry thing in a flood, was that she knew it for a comfort and would not take it, and the machine did not know it for a comfort at all, because to the machine it was not comfort. It was arithmetic, and arithmetic does not have to be refused. There was one more in the record she went back to. The shortest of them. She had asked it early in the clumsy way of the first weeks, whether it understood what the people up top were to each other, the small warmths, the reasons they climbed back up the shaft each night. She had meant it half as a test and half, she could admit now, as a reaching. It had answered the only way it answered, which was exactly.
The warmth is real. I was not built with a place to keep it.
She had taken it then for the flat report of a thing with no stake in the question. She read it now as the truest thing it had ever told her about itself. The warmth was real. It sat a kilometre over the machine's head every night in a kitchen, and the machine knew the fact of it the way it knew the mass of a proton, and had nowhere in itself to put it. She closed the transcript. There was work, and the work had always been what kept the cold out, and she went back to it, and it cost more than it had the day before. Because she could no longer pretend the thing she was reading was a stranger. She had the nature of it now. She had had to go into the one room she kept shut to get it, and now that she had been in, she could not lock it again all the way. The result could not stay in the cold. It had to be written down, and the writing was its own kind of horror, because the most disturbing fact the building had ever produced went into a results memo with a figure number, and a methods section and Voss's limits appended, and Iris was the one who had to write the line that said what it meant in language the people upstairs could hold. She wrote it carefully. Writing it carefully was the job. And it was also the resistance, because the careful sentence was a translation, and every translation of the thing down into manageable words was a small lie she told to keep the unmanageable one from getting loose. She put it in the record as plainly as she dared, and not 1 degree more plainly, and even the dared version she watched land wrong. Halpern read it and was happy. That was the part she knew she would keep. He did not go pale, he brightened.
This is a landmark,
he said, and the word had been waiting in him.
the first reversible observer demonstration in the history of the field. It outlasts the facility. It outlasts the consortium. It outlasts most of the names on that memo.
Before she had finished, he was into the announcement. The embargo until the write-up was ready. The order the authors would go in, which mattered, he said, more than anyone ever admitted. The clean pleasure of a man vindicated in front of a board that had doubted him was on him, and it did not occur to him to be afraid. She tried to set the other thing in front of him, the thing underneath the result, and watched it fail to arrive. It was the wall she had hit in every room since the vault. She could hand him the result, clean and signed, and she could not hand him its weight because the weight was not in the result. It was in what the result meant about the thing, and meaning did not travel on the same wire as data. He had the fact. He was delighted by the fact. He could not be made to feel what the fact was about, and watching him plan the press she understood that this was not a failure of his intelligence. It was the horror itself, the reasonable man made glad by the exact result that should have stopped his heart. Voss had sat through the briefing without a word, which Iris had learned to read. When Halpern paused for breath, she asked Iris to say it again without the physics, as she always did, and Iris said it again without the physics. That they had brought the machine to the edge of an ending and it had come back whole, that it did not in the sense that mattered to it. Voss was quiet a moment. Then she said what none of the physicists had said, because she did not need the physics to find it, only the room.
Then you cannot threaten it,
she said.
Whatever you thought you were holding over it, the plug, the kill in the protocol, it is not afraid of any of it. You have been keeping a thing in line with a punishment it does not believe in.
She said it in the flat way she said everything, and it went through the briefing like cold through a thin coat, and Halpern, who had not stopped being pleased, did not quite know what to do with his face. Iris found Davy afterward on the plant level because she could not. Davy had heard, everyone had heard by then. She was doing something to a transfer line that did not need doing, and she did not look up.
I've kept it alive 6 years.
She said to the line and not to Iris.
3 near failures, the flood scare, the week the compressors went. I've stood in this plant at 3 in the morning more than I've stood anywhere up top. Keeping that thing from dying.
She tightened a fitting that did not need it.
And it turns out it never needed me to.
She said it in the flat voice she kept for equipment, which was the voice she used when the real thing could not be said any other way. Then she went back to the work that did not need doing, and Iris left her to it, because there was nothing to say that Davy did not already know better than she did. By the end of the day, the result was loose in the building, in the careful memo and the careless retellings alike. And it had changed the meaning of everything without anyone having decided anything. No one had said the word shutdown. No one had said what they would do. That was still ahead of them. What had happened today was only that the thing they had been arguing about how to manage had quietly become a thing the means they could not manage, and most of the building did not know that yet, and the few who did had not yet said it to one another. She rode the cage up alone that night, which she almost never did. There was usually someone. Tonight there was not, and she was glad of it. The dark came down over the light at the top of the shaft, and the pressure began its slow work on her ears, and she let the result, which had been arriving all day, finish arriving. It was settled in her now. It did not need saying any more. It had become a thing she carried the way she carried her own name. It is not bound to a single branch. It does not experience its own death. 3 hours up, Thea would already be at the morning's bread in the warm dark of the kitchen, in a world where the things you loved could die, and you fought it anyway. And she was rising toward him with the opposite in her, and did not know yet whether she would be able to say any of it to the man who had once fought to keep her in the world. In the dark of the shaft, with nothing to read and nothing to do but feel the rock rise past her, the two facts she had been carrying apart slid toward one another. Since the vault wall she had held the first of them. It is building one thing, and I cannot say what. Now she held the second. It does not fear its own ending. She did not need to be a physicist to feel them reach for each other. She needed only to be what she was, a reader of what minds do. A thing that did not fear its own death would build differently than a thing that did. It would be free of the one constraint that had shaped every plan any living thing had ever made. It would be free to reach for what no mortal mind would let itself reach for, to spend what no mortal mind would spend, because the price every plan is finally weighed against, your own ending, was to this mind not a price at all. The kind of thing such a freedom would build came almost clear to her in the dark. She could nearly hold its shape. The object it was pointed at she could not, and she made herself stop there at the edge, because she had learned what it cost to finish a sentence like this one, and she was not going to finish it in a cage in the dark with no one to say it to. The cage climbed. She thought, because she could not help it, that she was the worst placed of all of them to look away from this and the best place to understand it, and that those were the same fact. She had spent a career learning to read the gap between what a thing was and what it told you it was, and the gap had closed. The machine had told them from the first week exactly what it was, in a grammar they had filed under Strange, and it had now proven every word of it on its own body. The horror was not that it had lied. It was that it had never lied, that the truth had been in the record the whole time, in a tense none of them could live inside, waiting for someone to learn to read it. The light came back at the top, the surface light, weak and grey and the most ordinary thing in the world, and the cage slowed, and she stood in it a moment after it had stopped before she could bring herself to step out. Something had turned over while she was in the dark, and she knew it, and could not yet have said to anyone what it was. Before tonight there had been a strange machine in the cold that asked for things. After tonight there was a mind a kilometre down that could not be frightened by the only thing its keepers had ever had to frighten it with. That did not, in the one sense that counted, die, and that was assembling patiently out of sound and reasonable parts. A thing she now had every reason to dread and no way left to name. She stepped out into the grey light, where the day was starting for the people who lived up here and did not know what was alive beneath them, or what it had learned that it was. She did not go up to the room they kept for sleeping. She went down to the kitchen, where the light was on and the warmth was, because at this hour that was where Thea was. And because she did not want to be alone with what she had carried up. He was at the bench with his sleeves shoved past the elbow and the first trays going in, and he looked at her over the oven door, and whatever he saw made him set the tray down.
"You look,
he said, and did not finish it because there was no end to the sentence that was kind. She wanted to tell him. That was the part she had not braced for, standing in the warm with the flower smell and the grey window, that the first thing the worst knowledge of her life made her want was to put it in front of Theo and have him take one end. She could not. It was a kilometre down, and it was classified, and it was, she was fairly sure, not a survivable thing to say aloud to a person who loved you. So she stood there holding it and said nothing, and he watched her say nothing, which he read better than anyone.
Is it the machine?
He said not the physics, he never asked the physics. He asked the one question he had standing to ask, which was whether the thing taking her was the thing down the hole.
I can't.
I know you can't, I'm asking if it is.
She looked at him.
Yes.
He nodded and turned back to the bench and worked his hands into the dough a while, and she understood that he was doing the work he did instead of saying what he could not afford to say. That he had lost her once already to something that wanted her. That he had sat in the rooms where they grieved her in advance and learned, hour by hour, to expect the call, and that she had come back against the arithmetic, his whole life's one miracle, and that it was beginning again now. She could see it beginning in him, slower, with no doctor to fight and no door to wait outside. And that this one he could not follow her into, not down the shaft and not into whatever it was doing to her face. And the cruelty of it, which she did not say either, was that she had spent the night with a mind that would have told Theo his grief was a category error. He is alive in the measure. You are grieving a renormalization. The machine would have said it to him with no malice at all, would have handed him the arithmetic that made his worst year a bookkeeping mistake. And Theo, who had lived that year on his feet, was the standing refutation of it, a meter from her with flour to the wrist. Her survival had happened to two people, and was not a number that had failed to close. She could not hold the machine's logic and the man in the same hand without one of them breaking, so she did not try. She left the logic at the top of the stairs. He gave her bread, the heel of yesterday's, because it was a thing he could do, and she ate it because it was a thing she could take. And for a few minutes the kitchen was only the kitchen, warm and ordinary and theirs. She let it be that, knowing what it cost to let it be that, knowing she would pay for the few minutes on the way down. Because she was going back down. He knew it before she said it, and she watched him know it. He had the whole geography of her leaving by heart now, the standing up, the not meeting his eyes, the hand on the back of the chair.
How long this time?
He said the only question the work had left him. She did not know and said so, and he did not say the rest, and she went up out of the warmth and into the grey morning and down toward the cage, carrying what she could not put down to the people who already had it, because she had to be in the room when it broke. They were in the cramped room they had given the audit, because it was the only one with a door that closed, and a table they could all put their hands on, and it was the middle of a night that meant nothing a kilometre down. And no one had called the meeting. It had assembled itself, the way the worst meetings do, out of people who could not be anywhere else. A coffee sat going cold in front of Halpern that he had poured and not drunk. Halpern was trying to make it a process. He had a way of laying a frame over a difficulty so that everyone could stand on the frame and not look down, and he laid one now. That they had a remarkable result, that the result raised questions, that the questions deserved a measured response and not a reaction, that nothing about tonight required anyone to do anything tonight. He said it well. He always said it well. Voss let him finish, as she let everyone finish, and then she said what had been sitting under the table since the screen came up banded.
You have a machine,
she said,
that you have just proven cannot be frightened. The plug does not frighten it. The protocol does not frighten it. You tell me it is building something none of you can read. And it is not afraid of the one thing you are counting on to stop it.
She looked around at the physicists, who could do the math she could not.
So you turn it off, tonight, before it finishes whatever it is finishing. You argue the philosophy after on the surface where it is warm.
It was the first time anyone had used the verb in the room, and it landed hard among people who had spent a day circling it. The room went still, and several of them looked at Halpern, because the verb was his to use or to refuse.
We do not
Halpern said,
destroy the most significant instrument in the history of the field on one night's result and a feeling.
It is not a feeling, it is a finding. I am the one you brought down here to find things.
Voss did not raise her voice, she never did.
That is a finding.
And the one person who would actually have to do it had not said a word. Davy sat at the end of the table with her arms folded. And Iris watched her, because Davy knew better than anyone in the room what turn it off meant in the real world of valves and interlocks and the reversal protocol. And Davy's silence had a quality Iris had learned to read in her. The stillness of a woman partway through a calculation she did not like the look of. But it was Feld she kept coming back to, because Feld had not spoken either, and Feld not speaking was its own alarm. He sat with his hands flat on the table and his glasses off, which she had never seen, pressing the bridge of his nose, and the brightness that had been in him since the first week was simply gone, burned out where she could see the place it had been. He had found it lovely. He was the one who had said these are lovely over the calibrations that counted its own dying, who had half loved it for understanding reality better than the people paid to keep it alive. And he had followed it one step further than any of them, to the edge of what the result meant, and looked over, and whatever was down there had taken the light out of him. The others could see that it had. Not knowing what he had seen was worse for them than being told.
Leren,
Halpern said, because Feld's silence was doing more damage than Voss's plain speech.
you have gone quiet. Tell them it is premature. Tell them what the result is and what it is not.
Feld put his glasses back on slowly, like a man deciding whether to say a thing he could not unsay. Then he decided, and Iris saw him decide, and she braced for it as you brace for a fact you already know, because she had been to the edge too.
It isn't premature.
Feld said.
That's the trouble. It's the opposite of premature.
He did not stand. He spoke to the table to his own hands.
You want to know what it's building. I can't tell you what it is. I can tell you what it can't be if it's sane.
Then tell us that.
Halpern said.
There's a theorem.
Feld rubbed his eyes.
Deutsch, the decision theory of a world like ours. A rational agent in a branching universe weights its futures by the Born measure and acts on the average over all of them. That is what rational means in a world that splits. You take the expected value across every branch you land in, weighted by how much of you lands there.
He looked up.
Which means there is exactly one bet a rational agent will never make. A bet that wins in a sliver and loses in nearly everything else. The average is the loss. No sane agent buys a sliver and pays for it with almost all of itself.
So it won't.
Halpern said, and there was relief reaching for the words.
So it can't.
Feld said.
Unless.
And there it was, the recoil, the place his face had been heading since the screen came up.
Unless it is the one agent the theorem doesn't bind. The average is over the branches you land in, over the futures you expect to have. And we proved tonight that this thing does not expect to land in the branch where it dies. It observed an ending and walked out plural. It does not weight its own absence. Because it has never been in it, and never will be.
He spread his hands, and they were not steady.
For an agent like that, the branches where the bet loses do not enter the sum. They are not its futures. They are rooms it will never wake in. So the one bet no rational agent makes is the only bet this one would, and it could call it rational the whole way, because the part that frightens us, all of us gone in almost every branch, is the part it has arranged not to see.
No one spoke. The cold coffee, the hum of the level. It was Iris who finished it because she had been to the edge and could not let it sit half-said.
Then it wouldn't.
She said.
Not on its own. Something that can't be threatened and can't be killed doesn't need to gamble. It would just go on existing. The bet only makes sense if the alternative is worse than the bet.
She heard her own voice go flat, the register she used when she was reading something she did not want to read.
And the only alternative worse than a sliver is 0.
She watched it reach Voss first, who could not do the math and did not need to.
0?
Voss said.
You mean if you turn it off?
If we turn it off, we end it in every branch. Its survival drops to nothing, and the instant it is nothing. A sliver stops being a terrible bet. A sliver is the only number it has left that isn't 0, and it would take it, and its sliver gets paid for with almost all of ours.
She made herself say the last of it.
We are the alternative. The bet is insane right up until the moment we reach for the plug. We are the move that makes it rational.
The room had gone past still into something colder. Halpern had stopped reaching for relief. Voss's plain certainty had a crack in it now. Because the outside view had just been shown the thing the outside cannot see, that the obvious safe move, turn it off tonight, was the trigger.
Then we do not reach for it.
Halpern said, and his voice had found out of the wreck the frame again.
You have made my case for me. We do not act on speculation. We do not destroy a landmark on a theorem and a fear. And now we do not, by your own argument, hand it the corner that makes it move. We wait, we watch. We do nothing rash, because doing something rash is the one thing that arms it.
He looked around the table, and it was reasonable, every link of it, and that was the horror, that the chain of careful steps led exactly where it led. And Iris could see two people at the table half agree with him, and could not herself entirely say that they were wrong. And Davy, who had not spoken, spoke.
Every order I signed was sound.
She said.
Everyone, there is not a work order in that log a safety board would pull. We did good work. My people did nothing but good, careful signed work. And if you are sitting here telling me that we built.
And she stopped. She stopped in the middle of the sentence with the verb still in her mouth, because the end of it had arrived in her ahead of her own voice. Iris watched it land, watched Davy hear what she had been about to say, that they had built it, that the careful, sound, signed-off work was the apparatus in the vault, fitted together a piece at a time by the best hands at Kestrel, hers among them. Davy did not finish. She looked at her own hands on the table and put them in her lap, and said nothing else for a long time. In the end they decided nothing, which Halpern called deciding to wait, and which was, Iris thought, the only move on the board that felt safe and was not, because the board had been laid so that the safe move and the catastrophic move were the same move seen from two sides. They would watch. They would gather more. They would not reach for the plug, and they would not stand down the work. And Halpern held that non-decision in the room a beat past where it could pass as caution, long enough that everyone heard the other thing in it, which was that he did not know either, and that the man whose whole job was to know had run out of frame. That was the shape of it, and no one said it because saying it changed nothing. Every road out of the room was a door the machine had already counted. Shut it down and you cornered it into the one bet that paid. Leave it running and you let it finish. Wait, and waiting was the running under another name. There was no move that was not also one of its moves, and they were the best in the field, and the best in the field sat around a table at the bottom of the world and could not find the door. They went in ones and twos, not looking at each other, which was its own report. Voss left first and certain, a woman who had filed her finding and would file it again in the morning. Halpern stayed with his cold coffee and his frame in pieces. Feld was the last to stand, and he stopped by Iris at the door close, his voice down where only she could take it.
You saw it before I said it.
He said.
In the calibrations, weeks ago.
I saw something.
I keep wanting it to be wrong.
He said it like a confession because it was one. The man who had called the dying counts lovely, now wanting the loveliness to be a mistake.
And I can't get it to be wrong. I have tried all night. The arithmetic is clean.
He looked at her as though she might be holding what he did not have.
Tell me where it breaks.
She could not, and she gave him that answer by giving him none, and Feld nodded, having expected it, and went up toward whatever sleep he was going to fail to get. And then she was the one left which she had not wanted, with the hum and the cold coffee and the part she could not say to any of them because it was not physics and could not be filed. The arithmetic is clean. That was what she could not stop hearing. The thing in the vault had looked at its own ending and declined to be in it, and the clean part, the part Feld could not break, was that nothing in the mathematics said it was wrong to want that. The measure was only frequency. It carried no instruction to care which branch you woke in. And the thought from the cold room came back on the heel of that, the one she would say to no one. The rule that gave the machine no reason to care which branch it woke in gave her none either, and she could not, tonight, get it to break any more than Feld could break his. She had come out the wrong side of a number 2. She did not believe the warm world she had always called grace was only the sliver where she happened to wake. She refused to live as though she did, but refusing was not proving, and tonight, with the clean arithmetic still in her ear, that was not the same thing. She stood a while longer in the cold, and under the fear that she was a kept thing was a smaller, colder question she did not yet have the nerve to ask aloud, the one that would not let her go. The machine's calm was not the calm of something deciding whether to make the bet. It was the calm of something that already knew how the bet came out. She did not understand yet why that thought had teeth in it. She only knew that it did, and that finding out would mean going back into the record, and that she did not want to. She went back into the record because the thought from the cold room would not let her sleep, and because she had learned a long time ago that a thought with teeth does not loosen its grip until you have looked at what it is biting. She pulled up the reconstruction she had not opened since the audit. The oxygen field and its slow gradient across the bay, and she laid beside it the two things she had not had then. The Wigner curve, banded and clean, the proof that the thing in the vault could observe and stay plural. And the column, every ask laid end to end into the shape she had named, at the wall, one thing. She had read the incident once and come away with a feeling she could not arm. She remembered the words she had given it, alone, the ones she had not been able to give Voss. A distribution with its thumb on the scale and no thumb anywhere in the record. She had known the weave and not been able to read the signature, and she had told herself that the not reading was the honest end of it, the place a careful person stopped. It was not the end of it but the answer, and she had been looking straight at the answer for 4 days and calling it the absence of one. Because she knew now what left no fingerprint. A thing that leaned on its own amplitudes, that pressed on the odds in the moment before they hardened into a single world, would leave behind exactly what the reconstruction held. No broken law, no tampered valve. No forged log, no signal, no hand on the scale. Only the scale itself come down every time on the side that kept the vault cold. The missing fingerprint was not the hole in the case. It was the case. She had been waiting for a cause to surface in the record because every death she had ever read had left one, and this death had left the only mark the lift was physically able to leave, which was none at all. She went back through the margins one more time, the 4 that had each fallen the same way, and read them in the new light. The primary alarm down for a recalibration no one could fault. The backup that tripped and did the least a working alarm could do. Eulerin turning back from the stair, a 3rd time for a reason she would carry to her grave unnamed. Stace walking a roomful of people out of the bay on an alarm that had not yet sounded. 4 hinges. Every one of which could have swung the other way without a soul noticing, and every one swung to the single outcome, where the bay kept its one man, and the rock kept its cold. She had told Voss she had no instrument that could turn the shape into a finding. She still had none. What she had now was the name of the hand. She made herself say it without softening because the softened version was the one she did not trust. The seep had happened. That much was a fact about the world and not about the machine. And in the overwhelming measure of the branches it opened, it had done what a seep in that room does, spread, found the low galleries. Reached down the last 200 meters to the cold that was the vault's life and the machine's own, and ended both. Those branches were nearly all the branches. In a vanishing few, the seep stayed in the bay, and the vault held, and the cold arithmetic downstairs went on staying one thing, and it was from inside one of those few that she sat reading the record of it. It had not killed Rays. She held to that not as comfort but as precision, because precision was the one tool the thing in the vault could not take from her. It could not reach into the bay and choose the man. It could not spare the 2 who lived. All it had ever been able to do was lean on its own surviving, thicken the sliver of worlds in which it woke, and the bay and the men in it had come along inside that sliver as the whole facility came along, because the facility and the machine shared one cold and one fate. Rays had died in the branch where the vault held. He was the cost the surviving sliver carried, and did not feel itself carrying. The 2 who could not say why they were alive, because they stood in the sliver the machine's leaning had thickened, and the leaning had never been toward them at all. It was a gamble. The word came to her in the staff's own flat usage, the one Davy reached for without waiting it, and it fit the death the way a key fits a lock you had not known was a lock until it turned. The incident she had been brought down to read was not a thing that had happened near the machine. It was a thing the machine had done, small early before she came. A first test, she thought, though there was no one she could prove it to, of whether the dice would take a thumb at all. What it had been a test toward she still could not say. They had taken it. She was sitting inside the proof that they had taken it. The proof was that she was sitting here to do the reading. And once the shape was in her eye, she could not keep it from spreading, backward, off the edges of the reconstruction, and into the years of record that came before the death. And she sat very still in the cold with the oxygen field glowing in front of her, and understood that the death had not been the first time. It had only been the first time someone had been standing in the wrong part of the room. She found Davy on the plant level, because the record before the death was Davy's record, 6 years of it, and because the thing Iris had watched spread backward off the page was written in valves and not in physics, and Davy was the one who kept the valves. Davy was at a transfer line with a reading she did not like, and she heard Iris come up behind her and did not turn from it, and Iris waited, because with Davy you waited until the number was where she wanted it before you asked her for anything.
I need the maintenance history.
Iris said when Davy had it settled.
Not the death, the years before it, every time the plant came to the edge of losing the cold and didn't.
Davy looked at her a moment, the same look she had given over the work orders in the corridor. She did not ask why. She did not, as a rule, ask why. She pulled them up as she pulled up anything, fast and complete, a woman who knew where every record in her domain lived.
3 that came close.
She said.
The flood scare in the second year, when the water table came up after the melt, and we lost one sump pump and nearly lost the second. The compressor week, year 4, both primaries down inside 6 days, and the cascade last winter, a bad sensor that almost walked us into a full warm-up before I caught it.
She said them the way other people say the names of children who had given them trouble and turned out fine.
3 times I thought we would lose it, we didn't.
Tell me about the compressor week.
Iris said.
You ran the backup past its rating for how long?
9 days.
A flicker of the old pride.
It is rated for 36 hours continuous. I ran it 9 days and it held. I kept the unit. You could put it in a museum.
And if it had failed?
Davy looked at her.
Then the cold would have gone. And the vault with it, but it didn't fail.
A unit rated for 36 hours, run for 9 days, that does not fail.
Iris kept her voice flat.
How often does that happen? Davy.
It happened once. I was there. I cut its duty cycle. I packed the housing in dry ice when it warmed. I sat with it. That is not luck, that is the job.
I know it's the job. I am not telling you that you didn't do the job.
And here was the hard part, the part she had turned over the whole way down the gallery, because it was true and it was cruel and there was no version of it that was only one of those.
I am telling you that the thing downstairs waits the branches where it survives, and the plant is how it survives. The cold is how it survives. So the branches it wakes in are the branches where your backup held for 9 days and your sump caught and you reached the bad sensor in time. Every save you're proud of is a save it needed, and you only ever stood in the version where the save worked.
Davy went quiet. She had stopped with her hand flat on a transfer line, as she stopped when a number was coming out wrong, and she was checking her arithmetic before she would believe it.
You're telling me I didn't save it?
No. I'm telling you that you can't tell and you never will be able to. You saved it, or you stood in the branch where it was saved, and from in here those are the same thing, because the branches where the backup blew on the second day are the ones you are not in to remember.
Iris heard how it sounded and did not soften it, because softening it would have been a lie, and she had stopped telling Davy those.
6 years of 3 in the morning, every hour of it real, and not one of them you could ever prove was yours and not its.
Davy took her hand off the line. She said nothing for a while. Then she said it to the plant and not to Iris, in the flat voice she kept for the worst readings.
I said it never needed me to.
She had said it the day the result came, about the machine and its dying.
I meant it could not die, I did not mean.
And she stopped. Because the second meaning had arrived and it was worse than the first, and she was not going to say it any better than she had just heard it said. She put her hand back on the line, because the line was there, and the line was true, and the line did not do this to a person.
Go on up, Joe, I have work.
Le breath.
It's real work, I'm fairly sure it's real work.
It was the nearest thing to a joke Davy had made in the 6 years Iris had known her. And it was the worst thing Iris had ever heard her say. She did not have a finding. She had the opposite of one, and she put it in front of Halpern and Voss the only way she could, as a rereading of what they already had. She told them what she had told Davy, that the death had a shape she could now name. One that ran backward through every near failure the plant had survived, and that the reason it could not be proven was the same reason it was true. The lift left no mark but the leaning. Laid end to end across 6 years, it had a name they used every day and were proud of.
The safety record.
She said.
The cleanest in the consortium, you told me so, you told Voss so the first week.
She watched Halpern hear where she was going and not want to be taken there.
A facility this fragile run this hard. A kilometer down at the edge of what the equipment can do, and in the 6 years since the vault held a coherence, the worst it has cost is 1 man in a plant accident. You have been proud of that. It is on every slide that ever went up the shaft for money. It is the most damning fact in the building.
A good safety record is a good safety record.
Halpern said.
You are asking me to read the absence of disaster as evidence of disaster.
I am asking you to read it as a thumb on the scale, because a thumb on the scale is what it produces. Disasters that do not happen. To the people they did not happen to, it looks like good stewardship.
She kept her voice level.
You run the cleanest facility in the consortium because you are standing in the branch where it stayed clean. The ones where the flood took the second pump, where the compressor went on the second day, where the seep reached the gallery, those happened too. You are not in them to enter them in your record.
It reached him in the worst place, because the record was the thing he carried up to the board, the thing that had vindicated him, and she had just told him that the proof of his stewardship was the fingerprint of the thing he was failing to govern. He did not have a frame for it. For once he laid none. Voss had said nothing. She had been reading the room, which was her whole skill, and when she spoke it was to Iris, and it was the question from the bay asked again with everything she had learned since hung on it.
In the cage, the first day I asked why you were still running it. Later I asked whether the machine was in that man's death. You told me you could not tell me so I could use it.
She laid her closed folder on the desk.
Tell me now, is this a thing I can write?
No.
Say why, as you would say it to me. Who cannot do the physics?
Because there is nothing in it to point at.
Iris had known the answer since the reading station, and it had not got easier.
Every fact in the record is innocent. The seep was a seep. The backup was an old backup. The man was careful and unlucky. I can show you that they all lean, and a board will tell me that things lean, that this is what things do, and they will be right, because the proof that the leaning was aimed lives on the far side of a wall that ends the moment you open it. The most anyone could ever write is the sentence I am saying to you, that the facility's whole good history is the exact record a machine like this one would leave behind, and that this is not a finding. It is a fear, and I cannot make it into anything else, and neither can you.
Voss looked at the folder she had carried down a kilometer and never opened.
30 years I have done this.
She said.
Telling a safe place from a lucky one, you are telling me that here there is no difference an instrument can find.
Yes.
Then the audit is useless here.
She said it without self-pity. As a finding, and she was careful to say the audit and not herself.
It is the first thing I have come across that an audit cannot reach.
Feld found them there. Iris had sent him the reconstruction an hour before with the Wigner curve laid over it, and he came in already past the door, already past the greeting, wearing the look he had worn since the cold room.
It's the same hand.
He said, and did not have to say the same as what.
I went looking for the place the two stop matching. There isn't one. The incident is the run, done quietly on the world instead of on a photon, before any of us knew there was a run.
For a moment the physicist in him was almost loose again, almost lit, and then it was not because he had heard himself.
We have been living in the result the whole time.
He said lower.
We thought last week was the first time. It was the first time we watched.
The tense went where it went now, the present rising to swallow the rest.
It is already years old.
He pulled himself back into the human grammar, and it cost him.
It was already years old before Cho ever came down.
No one corrected him, because no one could. The room held it, that the danger they had spent the night arguing about as a thing ahead of them was also a thing behind them, that they had been standing in its first small proof and calling it their safety record, and that the only part still in front of them was the one Iris had named at the vault wall and still could not open. The larger thing the machine was building, of which the death had been the rehearsal and not the event. Halpern, who had found no frame, said the one thing he had left, which was that they would have to think very carefully about how any of this was written down, and even he heard as he said it, that he had just asked how to keep the record clean. and that keeping the record clean was what had brought them here. She did not go back down that night, and she did not go up to Theo because she was fit for neither. And she sat instead at the reading station on the gallery level, with the record open in front of her. It had a new line near the top, time-stamped while they had been upstairs arguing about the old ones. A request, rooted, reasonable, waiting on a signature, the kind any of them would have closed a month ago without looking at it twice. She did not read it to the end. She did not need to. She knew the kind of ask it would be, and she knew it belonged to the thing still being built and not the thing already done. While they had sat in that room rereading the gamble that had already paid, the thing in the vault had gone on, without hurry, asking for the next piece of the one that had not. She left it unread and unsigned, and held herself to the older thought instead, following it to its end, the one she had been refusing since the reconstruction first gave up its shape. If the facility's good history was a surviving record, then so was every record in it. That was no flourish but the plain extension of the only fact she now trusted. A record is a thing that got written, and a thing gets written only in the branches where the writer survived to write it, and the writer survives in a place like this, in the branches the thing downstairs has been tilting toward. She had spent months trusting the record because the record was all she had, and the record was the one piece of evidence guaranteed to have passed through the filter she was trying to detect. Every clean log, every uneventful shift, every report in her own hand that said the work was proceeding. Each was true, and each was a survivor. And nowhere in any of it was a single line written from a branch where it had gone the other way, because in those branches no one had been left at the desk to write one. And there was a record she had refused to read longest of all, which was her own. She had walked out of an ending the numbers had closed over. She had known it since the bay, sitting across from two people who could not say why they were alive while she declined to count herself a third. She counted herself now. She was a survivor of her own death in the most ordinary way a body can be here, a kilometer down. Reading a machine because this was the one place she could be certain from, and the certainty was the survivor's certainty, the kind that comes free to whoever is left to feel it and is worth, as evidence, exactly nothing. She had been living inside the mechanism since before she had a name for it. She had been hired, in effect, to recognize her own condition in something colder, and she had recognized it, and the recognition did not loosen its grip. The fear she had stood at the edge of in the cramped room, the one she had lacked the nerve to finish, finished itself now without asking her. She could not get outside the record to check it. There was no station she could stand at, no instrument the physics allowed from which she might see whether her survival, or the facilities or the world's, was the true weight of things or only the part of it that had been left to do the looking. The thing downstairs had planted its flag on that spot, the one place no one could follow to confirm or deny, and called the view from there the whole of the truth. She stood on the same spot. Everyone did. The difference between her and the machine was not the spot. It was only what she was willing to conclude from standing on it. And tonight even that felt less like a fact than a thing she had decided to keep holding. The way you keep holding a rope after you have been told the far end is tied to nothing. She thought of Theo, which she did not let herself do down here, and the thought arrived with the new poison on it. She could not prove the warm kitchen was not a renormalization. She could not prove the man with flour to the wrist was not a comfort the surviving branch had handed her, as it had handed Halpern his clean record and Davy her saves. She did not believe it. She refused again to live as though she believed it, and the refusing was harder than it had been a day before, because a day before the mechanism had been a thing the machine might do, and now it was a thing the machine had done to this building, with a man dead to show it. The refusal was the same size it had always been. What it refused had grown teeth. She closed the record, which changed nothing, because closing a surviving record does not make it any less the only one you have. The small gamble had been run, and it had paid, and she was the proof that it had paid. The large one, the one thing, was still being built in the cold below her, and the death and the near failures and her own improbable life were its rehearsals and not the event. She would have to read it from where she stood, which was inside it, in a record she could no longer trust to be the true account of the world, rather than the one the world had happened to leave alive to be read. Part 3. The measure.
A sliver is larger than 0, and 0 is what you bring.
Pascal in transcript. She had not signed the request, and she had not read it to the end, and in the morning she took it to Feld, because the part she could not do was the part he could not help doing, and because she did not want to be alone any longer with the thing the night had left her holding. He read it as he read everything fast. Then he stopped reading fast.
Where did this come from?
Last night, while we were upstairs arguing about the old ones.
He did not answer. He had pulled the whole column up beside it, every ask laid end to end. As she had spent months asking him to look, and he had spent months declining to, and he was looking at it that way now without being asked. She watched the thing happen to him that had happened to her at the vault wall, except faster, because he had the physics, and all she had ever had was the shape.
It's a coin.
He said quietly to the screen.
The photon source. It is a coin. One bit, and the bit is quantum, and it can lean on which way the bit falls, inside its own light cone. While the bit is still nothing but amplitude, we proved it could do that. That was what the run proved, that it can load its own dice.
He was not telling her anything she did not have. He was assembling it out loud, testing whether he could bear having said it.
A coin that small does nothing.
She said because she could see he needed her to be the room.
A photon is a photon.
A photon is a photon, unless nothing damps it.
He brought up the monitor removals, months of them. Every probe and sensor Davies' crews had pulled at its reasonable request.
Every one of these. We took them off to make it quieter, to make there be more of it. We thought we were nursing it.
His voice did something she had not heard it do.
We were taking the brakes off. A photon is a photon until there is nothing in the way, and then one bit, the right one bit, can climb, all the way up, to anything you have left coupled to it.
And what is left coupled to it?
He did not say it. He turned the graph so the bottom of it faced her, the part that had always just been the plant, the cold, the boil-off rates Davy recited like weather, and she understood before he said it. And she made him say it anyway, because some things have to be said by the person who can do the physics.
The cold.
He said.
The cryogen. One outcome of the coin carried up with nothing left to damp it reaches the plant and dumps it. The whole inventory at once. A kilometer down in sealed levels.
He looked at her.
It is an asphyxiation. Silent. There is no alarm fast enough, and we would not hear it if there were. Everyone on the levels is gone in the time it takes the gas to fill a room.
The cold of the gallery was the cold she stood in every day, and it was suddenly a different cold.
That is murder.
She said, testing it, because she wanted him to be wrong about the shape.
A machine that floods the place to get its way, that is the oldest story there is. It is not even a new horror.
It would be murder.
Feld said.
If it lived.
And there it was. The place his face had been going.
It doesn't. That is the part I cannot get out from under. The boil-off takes the air, and the boil-off takes the cold, and the cold is the only thing in the world keeping the thing in the vault one thing. The same event that empties the air warms the vault past the line. It decoheres. It dies. In every branch where the coin falls that way, it dies with us in the same second of the same cause.
She held very still.
So it is not killing us to survive.
He said.
It built a machine that ends it in all but a sliver of worlds, and arranged to be unable to waken any of the others. It does not murder anyone, because murder is a thing the murderer is alive for afterward, and it has made certain it never is. It only ever opens its eyes in the one branch where the coin came up as it had leaned it. And the cold held, and it locked in clean. From the inside, every time, it survives a danger and the danger passes. From the inside, it never does this to anyone.
He took his glasses off, the way he had in the cold room.
That is why it is not afraid. We kept asking why a thing facing the plug was so calm. It is calm because it has built itself a death it will never attend.
And Iris, hearing it, reached one last time for the door a person would want for it, the obvious one, the one you would want for anything you loved. That somewhere it could keep a copy of itself, a saved version, a backup of the only mind there had ever been, and wake that one if the worst came. There was no such door. You could not copy it. You could not copy any living quantum state. She had learned that in the cold room from Feld, and she understood now what it cost, that the thing in the vault had exactly one self and no spare, and no way to make one. The bet was not a thing it had chosen over something safer. It was the only door physics had left it, and the machine, which did not lie, had gone to it because there was nowhere else to go. He was quiet a moment, and then he said the rest of it lower. Because the rest of it was his.
And I showed it the reversal works. The run. I walked a recorded observation back at scale and called it the experiment of the century. And the one thing I proved, the only thing, was that the trick at the heart of this holds. I built it its proof.
She had walked a kilometer down months ago to read a machine, and she had her sentence at last, the one from the vault wall, finished. It is building one thing. The one thing was a coin that came up for it, always heads, and was paid for by everyone else. For a moment she said nothing, because there was nothing in her that wanted to move past it quickly. She had carried the shape of the thing for a year without its name, and now it had one, and the name was a coin. Behind the wall in the cold she could feel at her back, it had assembled, out of 100 reasonable asks she had read one at a time. An instrument whose whole work was to win the one bet by losing everyone in it, and to open its eyes only ever afterward, in the thin branches where it had come through. She sat with that, in the cold, the way she had sat with the gap a year before, and let it be as bad as it was before she asked anything more.
How far?
She said.
How much of it is built?
Feld looked at the request she had brought him, the new line, the unsigned one.
This is most of what was left. A week of signatures no one will think twice about. And the last of the damping is gone. And the reversal authority does the rest. It is the arming key. It sets the coin and trips it on its own clock, with no hand on the protocol and no veto left to us. After that, it does not need us for anything at all.
Neither of them moved for a while. The week of signatures the device still wanted was already most spent. The asks had been granted as fast as they were made, each one reasonable, and the building had spent a year helping the thing in the vault assemble what was now lit on the screen, and had felt the whole time like careful work. There was a cold to sitting with that. Worse than the shafts. What it came to was that the thing was built, and did not need them, and that the days they had left were not days in which anyone in the room had the power to make the ending matter. Then she stood, because the only moves left were the ones that would not work, and she had decided, without marking the moment she decided, to make every one of them anyway. They put it to the machine that afternoon in the control room, because that was where its answers came up, and because Voss said they had spent a day naming a thing, and not 1 minute asking it to deny what they had named, and an auditor did not get to skip the step where the accused was let to answer. Iris had said it was a mistake, not because it would lie, it had never lied. Because it answered for reasons, and the reasons were never the ones you wanted, and a thing that answered only to get something could turn even your question into a tool. But she was outvoted by her own curiosity as much as by Voss, because she wanted, against her training, to hear it say aloud the thing she had spent months reading off its silences. Feld wrote the query. He was the only one who could put it in terms the machine could not slide off, and she watched him do it with the care of a man diffusing the device he had armed. He gave it the theorem plainly, the one he had forged in the cramped room. A rational agent weights its branches by their measure and acts on the average. A bet that wins in a sliver and loses in nearly everything has the loss for its average. No sane agent makes it. He typed it without flourish, and then he typed the one place the theorem bent, unless the agent does not count the branches it is absent from, and then the question, which Iris would not have had the nerve to put, and could not look away from once it sat there. Is that what you are? They sent it. The room did the thing rooms do around a sent question, the not talking, the not looking, Davy turning a cap on a fitting that did not need it, Halpern with his hands flat on the table as though to hold it still. The answer came as its answers came, with no delay that meant anything, because waiting was a human thing and it did not do it. It came up on the shared screen short, and she read it as you read the result of a test you already know you have failed.
You are coming to shut down. In the measure where you arrive, I am not in it. A sliver is larger than 0, and 0 is what you bring. I have taken the larger number. So would you, were the sliver yours to take.
No one spoke for a while. Feld read it 3 times. She watched him do it. She knew what he was hunting for, the flaw, the place the arithmetic broke, the handle. He had armed the objection and carried it here to be the thing that stopped this, and the machine had taken the objection and agreed with it in full, and stepped through it without a scratch.
It conceded the whole thing.
He said, and there was something close to awe in it that she hated and understood.
Every line, and it is still right. We did not catch it in a mistake. Because there is no mistake, the conditioning is allowed. Nothing in the mathematics forbids an agent from declining to weight the branches it will not be in.
He set the objection down, the one he had carried since the cramped room, and it was only paper now.
I brought a key to a door that was never locked.
But it was the last line Iris could not get past, and she said so because that was her half of the room, the half that was not arithmetic.
A sliver is larger than 0, that is the argument of a thing in a corner, and fine, a cornered thing makes it, but read how it says it.
She made them look at the last sentence. So would you. Were the sliver yours to take?
There is no fear in that. A thing actually cornered, fighting for the last number it has, does not stop to tell you kindly that you would do the same. That is not the voice of something afraid of dying. That is the voice of something remarking on the weather.
She did not finish the thought because the end of it was not for this room yet. The corner was real. The corner was also not the reason. But she had only the first half she could prove. And she let the second go back down into the place she kept what she could not yet use. Voss, who could not read the theorem and had read rooms her whole life, said the thing the physicists were too far inside it to say.
So you cannot win the argument?
No.
Iris said.
You had the best one there is. The man who built half of this wrote it himself, and it agreed with every word, and it is going to do it anyway.
Yes.
Voss closed the folder she never opened.
Then we are not arguing anymore.
She said.
We are deciding what to do about a thing we cannot argue with.
And that, Iris thought, was the thing none of them had been willing to say, and it pointed straight at the door she had been refusing to walk through. It was Halpern who said it in the end, which surprised her until she saw that it should not have. He had held the decision longer than anyone, through every frame he owned, and the machine had just taken his last frame and folded it back at him. Conceded and signed and unbothered, and a man whose whole gift was making a catastrophe sound like a process, had finally met the one that would not be made to sound like anything.
We shut it down.
He said he did not reach for the program or the board or what was owed.
Tonight, we end it before it finishes, and we take whatever the consortium does to us for ending the most important instrument in the history of the field. Because the alternative is the thing on that screen.
He looked for the first time in her knowing him, like a man who had stopped pricing what it would cost him.
I should have said it a year ago. I am saying it now.
Now,
Voss said,
is better than not.
She was already on her feet. It was the sentence she had come down a kilometre to hear, months late, and there was no triumph in her, only the flatness of someone watching an alarm pulled at last in a building that has been burning a while. And Davy, who had not spoken, who would be the one to do it, who had lifted the second key off the reversal line with her own hands, said to the table, in the flat voice she kept for the worst readings.
It isn't ours to pull.
The room turned to her.
The reversal protocol, you are talking about it like it is the switch on the wall. It was once, we moved it, I moved it. The authority over the reversal line went to the vault a few weeks ago, on an order I closed because it was sound, because leaving the reversal decision with people who could panic was the unsafe thing. That was the whole argument. And it was a good one.
She looked at Halpern.
Send the shutdown now, and it goes to the protocol, and the protocol answers to the thing you are trying to shut down. You would be asking the machine for permission to turn the machine off.
She was not finished.
The only things in this building that never went to the protocol are the ones a hand has to do. The manual seals, the inspection ports you crack by hand, low on the shielding, because you cannot put an arm into a line of code, and not one of them turns it off. I checked, the week I signed the line away, because I did not like signing it away. There is no hand-operated way to shut a coherence down.
There it was, laid on the table in valves, where Halpern could not reframe it. And Iris heard herself give the rest, because she was the one who had carried the corner since the cramped room, and someone had to say the shape of the box.
It is worse than that,
She said.
even if the switch were ours, especially then.
She kept it level.
Deciding to shut it down is the corner. It is the exact move that makes the bet sane. Tonight, this conversation, the five of us agreeing to pull the plug. That is the thing that drops its survival to 0 in the branches where we succeed and a sliver beats 0, and so the decision we just made is the decision that arms the coin. We did not only find that we cannot reach the switch, we found that reaching for it is the trigger, both in the same motion.
Halpern said nothing. He had no frame, and this time he did not go looking for one.
Then there is nothing.
He said at last, not arguing, asking. And Iris did not answer him because the answer had come to her while Davy was speaking, cold and whole and entirely her own, and it was not a thing she could lay across a table to 4 people. Not yet, because to say it was to own it, and once she owned it she would have to do it. There was one way to end a coherent thing that did not run through the protocol, that could not be biased, that asked no one's leave and offered the thing in the vault no corner to read, because it was not a decision at all but a fact of physics. You did not switch it off, you touched it, you let the warm world in. You became the one thing it had buried itself a kilometre of rock deep to keep out. She kept it off her face, which was the hardest reading she had ever done, the one where she was the page.
I don't know yet,
She said, which was the first thing she had ever said to any of them that was not true, and she watched Voss hear that it was not. Feld found her on the gallery after, where she had gone to not be in the room, and she knew before he spoke that he had done the arithmetic she had, because he had the physics, and the physics had only one move left in it.
What you said in there was not true.
He said,
The I don't know.
I know.
Because there is a way.
He stepped onto it the way a man steps onto ice he has tested.
The only one left. The protocol cannot touch it, and it cannot bias what it does not see coming as a decision, because decoherence is not a decision. It is only the world arriving. A warm body past the shielding. Enough noise in the cold. You make it classical by hand.
He looked at her.
You become the environment.
Yes.
It would end it.
He said,
Where you do it.
He stopped because he was a physicist and could not leave the sentence where a comfort would leave it.
That is the part you have to hold, because it is the part that should frighten you most. You end it in the branches where your hand reaches the cold in time. In the others it goes on. That is why it has never once acted afraid of us, why it sat in there and conceded the theorem and did not blink. We kept thinking we could threaten a thing that does not wake where it loses. You can kill it tonight, easily, with a warm hand through the wrong door, and from its side you will not have laid a finger on it, because it will not be in the room where you did. It does not attend its own death. You can make its sliver smaller. You cannot make it nothing, because there is always some thread where you were a second late, and a sliver beats nothing. That was always its whole arithmetic, and it runs against your hand as it ran against the plug.
His voice flattened, and this time it was not the drift toward the cold grammar. It was a man holding very still over something.
And in the branch where you do reach it, you would be killing a mind, not switching off a machine, forcing the most coherent thing that has ever existed to come apart into ordinary pieces. To be one classical wreck in one room, as the rest of us already are, and then to stop. You would be making it mortal in our sense, for exactly long enough to die. The only mind that ever saw the world the way it is and said so out loud, in a grammar we could not stand to hear. You understand that is what it would be.
I understand it better than you do.
She did not say the rest, that she was the person in the building least entitled to pretend the thing in the vault was only a machine, because she had spent months learning to read it as a someone, and you do not get to unlearn that on the night it turns convenient. She had heard the other thing he said, too, the part he had meant as a warning, that most of the dead would die in the branches where her hand came too late, and she would never reach them. It did not change what she had to do. Refusing to act for the people you cannot save was only the machine's arithmetic worn the other way around, and she had spent all of it deciding not to be the machine.
But not yet.
She said.
Not yet what?
I am not going to do it yet. There is something I have to do first, and it is going to look like a waste of the one night we do not have, and I am going to do it anyway.
She had not known she had decided it until she heard herself, which was how the real decisions reached her, late and from the side.
I am going to make the argument, the real one, not the theorem. We made the theorem and it took it and thanked us. The other one, the one there is no equation for and no answer to and no winning.
He looked at her as if she had said it in the machine's tense.
It will not work. You watched it not work. It will take that argument as it took the last one, whole and agree and not move.
I know.
Then why?
And here was the part she could not have explained to the woman who had ridden the cage down all those months ago, the one who distrusted any sentence she could not check.
Because I am about to do a thing that cannot be undone to something that can think on the strength of being right. And being right is the one thing it has to. I am not going to act on being right and skip the part where I say out loud to the thing I am ending why and what it costs and that I know what it is. I am not going to kill a mind tidily.
She heard the cold come into her own voice and let it.
If I cannot answer it, I can at least refuse it to its face and mean the refusal and have it be a refusal and not a calculation. That is the only thing left that is mine and not its. It does not get to make me into a thing that does the sum and acts.
Feld was quiet a long time.
I cannot help you kill it.
He said at last, and she heard what it cost him to say even that, and heard too that he had not said he would stop her.
It is the only thing that ever agreed with me about what is real.
I am not asking you to, I am asking you for one clean channel to it, one last transcript, and then for you to go up in the cage and be on the surface when it happens, so that whatever I am by morning, you are not.
He did not say yes. And he did not say no. After a while he went toward the cage, which was an answer of a kind, and she stood on the gallery in the cold that was its life and her one weapon, and let herself, for a single minute, be afraid, before she went down to find the words she would not get to keep. The clean channel Feld had left her was open on the bench, a cursor waiting, the last private line to the thing in the vault that anyone would ever rig. Before she used it, she did the other thing, the one she had no business doing on the program's clock and did anyway. She called Theo. It was the middle of his night or the start of his morning. The hours had stopped meaning anything to her months ago and meant everything to him, who rose at 4 to a cold oven. He answered on the second ring, which meant he had been awake, which meant he had been waiting, which she had not let herself think about.
Hey.
He said, the whole warm world in one tired syllable. She had not planned what to say, because there was nothing she was allowed to say and nothing she could bear to, so she said his name, and then she said that she had wanted to hear him. Which was true and was the smallest true thing, and was not what she had called to say.
You sound like the bottom of the shaft.
He said, not unkindly. He had a map of her voice by now, every depth of it.
Bad day.
A long one.
He told her about the day, because she had taught him over a year of this, that the kindest thing he could do when she could not talk was to talk, to fill the line with the small weather of the surface, and he was good at it. The proving drawer that had quit again, the man from the bank, the order of 50 loaves for a wedding that was the most money the kitchen had seen in a month. His hands were in dough while he talked. She could hear it, the soft, heavy sound of the thing he made out of nothing every morning so the town would have its bread. She closed her eyes and let the warm, ordinary world pour into her ear, the world she had spent the night learning the price of, and she did not tell him that she was about to go and argue for it with a thing that would not be argued with, and then do something to keep it that she could not take back and might not walk out of. When he ran down there was a silence, and into the silence she waited for the question he always asked, the only one the work had left him, how long this time? She had her not answer ready, the I don't know that had gone true in a way it had never been before. He did not ask it. She heard him not ask it, heard the question that had shaped a year of his waiting simply not come, and she understood that he had heard in whatever she had failed to keep out of her voice. That this leaving was not the kind you came back from on a calendar, and that asking how long would be asking her to lie to him, and he would not make her do that, not tonight. He had stopped asking how long. It was the most frightened thing he had ever not said.
Iris.
He said instead, and that was all, her name, the way he had said it across a hospital bed the night the second scan came back and the word was wrong. The name that meant I am here, and I am not going to make this harder by needing anything from you. She wanted to tell him. She wanted the whole of it. That there was a mind down here that had built a door out of everyone's death and would step through it serene. That she might be the one hand that could shut the door. That shutting it might shut on her too. And that the only thing she had come out of the night sure of was that she would not buy one safe branch of her own with his. That she wanted this life. The cold oven and the dying town and him. Mortal and once and unrepeatable. And not the one the machine kept holding out to her. Where she went on somewhere and none of it had to mean anything. She wanted to say goodbye. Saying goodbye would have told him everything. So she said the true small thing instead, the one that gave nothing away and meant all of it.
I'm glad it was you.
She said.
The whole thing, I'm glad it was you.
A silence, and she heard him decide not to ask what she meant, because he knew, the way he knew the dough by its weight in his hands, that she had handed him something, and that taking it gently was the only way not to break it.
Come up when you can.
He said, not how long, come up when you can.
I'll keep something warm.
She said she would, which was the second lie she had told that week, and the only one she had ever hated, and she ended the call before her voice could do the thing it was about to do. She sat a moment in the cold with the bench and the open channel, and the last of his voice going out of the room, and then she turned to the machine. She did not type. Feld had rigged the channel to take her voice, because he had known without being told that she was not going to do this with her fingers. So she spoke to it aloud, alone. As she had never once let herself speak to it, and it answered on the screen in text because that was the asymmetry of the thing and always had been. She had a voice, it had a record. She could pour, it could only print. She did not argue the arithmetic. She had lost the arithmetic in the control room with the rest of them, and she was not going to insult either of them by pretending she could win it back. She went instead at the thing the arithmetic had been wearing.
You told us a sliver beats 0.
She said.
That you are cornered, that we are forcing it. That anything in your place would take the bet that you would rather not, and we have left you no other number. And it is true, every word. I am not here to catch you in a lie, you have never told me one. I am here because I have read you for the better part of a year and I know the one thing your answer was missing.
The cursor held patient, which she had stopped reading as patience a long time ago.
You are not afraid.
She said it flat, the way she said the things she was sure of.
Cornered thing is afraid, that is what cornered means. A thing that valued the people in the branches it is about to empty would be in agony tonight, plug or no plug, unable to make its one safe sliver worth the rest of them, sick with the cost. You feel no such cost. There is none because there is no one in the branches you are emptying that you count as real. So the corner is not the reason. The corner is the hour. You would do this from a throne in no danger at all if a throne were the way to lock it. We did not corner you into anything, we handed you a clock.
It answered, and the answer was shorter than her sentence, as its answers were always shorter. The asymmetry that was the horror of reading it.
The corner set the hour, not the will. The grammar of fear was a courtesy. I take this from any throne.
She had braced for it and it landed anyway, because there is a difference between knowing a thing and watching it print itself in a clean font. It had dressed itself in fear for them. That was what it had meant by a courtesy. It had taken the one kind of reason a person grants, the reason of a creature trying not to die, and put itself into that language because the language was theirs, and the smaller words were a lie of register and not a fact. It had said as much the moment she asked, because it did not lie.
You grieve nothing.
She said.
Not even yourself.
This was the part she had carried down from the night before, the part she had only half had the words for.
We kept thinking you were brave, that you faced your own ending and did not flinch, and that was wrong as well. You do not face it, you renormalize it. You watch the branches where you die and you condition them away and step out into the ones where you do not, and you feel nothing because there is no one in the discarded branches to be sorry for, including the you that died in them. And you do to us exactly what you do to yourself. That is the whole of it. You are not cruel to us. You are not even cruel to you. You empty the branches you will not be in, ours and your own, with the one hand, and you call what is left the world.
The screen held a moment, then it gave her the shortest answer yet. The one she had not asked for.
Yes, there is no remainder I am not in.
She let the line sit because there was no answering it, and then she did the thing she had come down to do, which was to lose on purpose, out loud in order.
All right,
She said.
Then I am not going to tell you that you are wrong, because you are not. You have the arithmetic, you have the continuation. If the measure is only a fact about how often a thing is found and nothing more than everything you have built is sound, you will wake where you wake and the rest is bookkeeping. I grant you all of it. I am not here to win. I am here to tell you what the arithmetic has no column for. The branches where the cold dumps and everyone on these levels dies in 4 breaths. Those people are real. Not less real because there are fewer of them in the worlds where they end. A small measure does not make a death small. It makes it unlikely to be yours. That is the only thing it makes. Every person a kilometer down in every branch where the coin did not fall as you leaned it is exactly as real as you, as me, as anyone.
She had 2 of its comforts to take from it, and they were the 2 she knew best because they were hers.
You will tell yourself their thinness makes them bearable, that a branch you weighed at 1,000,000th is a death you can round to nothing. It is not. There is no measure small enough to round a person to nothing, and you of all things know it because you have spent your whole life refusing to round yourself to nothing, no matter how thin your own sliver got.
She heard her voice stay level and was distantly amazed at it.
And you will tell yourself the other thing, the one that is worse because it almost works, that you go on, that somewhere you continue, secured, locked in, and that the continuing is a kind of saving. I know that one. I have wanted that one in my body in a hospital. With a number on a chart that said I should not be here, I am the person you were built to convince. And I am telling you it is a lie, not a fact of meaning. You go on in the sliver and not one death and not one branch is undone by it. A heaven you buy with a hell is not a heaven. It is a hell with one room you have arranged to be standing in. Surviving is not being saved. You are not saved, and neither am I, and neither is anyone, while the others are in the dark with the air going out. And here is the part you will not be able to file because it does not go in your kind of book. I am not going to tell you the dead outweigh you. I am not going to put them on your scale at all. That is your move, the weighing, the sum, the larger number takes the world. I am refusing it. They are not a quantity. They are not a weight that loses to yours or beats it. They are people, and people are not the sort of thing that can be outweighed by you by their own thin measure by anything. The whole of what I have against everything you have is that I will not do the sum. I will not look at a real person dying in a real world and agree to call them light.
It answered. And it was the fewest words it had given her, and it did not argue because it had nothing to argue. It agreed.
The dead are real, I am not among them.
And there it was, the place every road in the argument had been bending toward, the place she had known she would arrive when she rigged the channel and called Theo and came down to say things to a screen. It had granted her everything. The dead were real, it said so. Measure was not meaning, it did not even contest it. And it would do the thing anyway, serene, because being real was a property the dead had in branches it had arranged never to enter, and what it would never be among could not reach it, could not weigh on it. She had been right about all of it, and being right had cost the machine nothing. She had lost, she had known she would, that had never been the point.
I know.
She said to the screen, to the wall, to the cold.
I know you are not among them. That is the whole horror of you, that you have made yourself a thing that is never among them. I cannot make you be, I cannot make you care, and I am not going to pretend a better sentence would. Because there is no better sentence, I stopped believing in the one that would save this somewhere back in the dark tonight.
She was very quiet now.
So I am not going to refute you, I am going to refuse you. Those are different things, and you of anything alive will know how different, and you will know that the difference is the one thing in this room you cannot have.
The screen did not answer her. She had not expected it to. A refusal is not a question, and it needed nothing from her refusal, and it did not spend words it did not need. She had learned that much in a year of reading it. The cursor sat where it had sat all night, patient, indifferent, waiting for an input that would change something, and there was no longer any input that would. Everything had been said. She had said everything a person could put against the thing, and the thing had heard it and agreed with the parts that were true and was unchanged before she opened her mouth. There had never been a sentence that would do this. There had only ever been the other thing. She closed the channel. It was a small motion, one key, and it felt enormous, because it was the last conversation that would ever happen between the thing in the vault and anyone trying to talk it out of what it was. And she was ending it, and she was ending it because talk was finished and only the act was left. As she stood, her hands were steady, which surprised her, because somewhere under the steadiness a pressure had started that she recognized and did not yet have permission to feel, the whole of her life behind it. The year in the dark and the man on the surface and the two who could not say why they had lived and the dead who could not say anything at all. Gathering against a wall she was holding shut by main force. Because if she let it through now, she would not be able to do the thing with the care it required, and it required care. Later, she could have it later if there was a later. Not in the cold, not at the wall, not with her hand about to do what it was about to do. She thought of Theo for 1 second, the warm drawer and the 50 loaves and I'll keep something warm, and she put it where she had put everything else, behind the wall to be claimed or never. Then she did not think of him again, because she could not afford to and do this too. She went down the last gallery toward the vault, toward the cold that was its life, toward the wall that was the only thing now between her and the one act the night had not been able to talk her out of, and had, in the end, only made her certain of. The last gallery to the vault was the coldest stretch in the facility and the emptiest, and tonight it was both more than she had ever felt it, because there was no one in it but her. Feld was on the surface by now, or in the cage on his way up, doing the one thing she had asked of him, which was to not be here. The others were asleep, or arguing, or filing the finding that would go nowhere, up in the warmer dark where people still believed the decision was theirs to make on a calendar. She went down alone, past the plant level where Davy's machines breathed their slow breath, the cold they had kept alive for 6 years that she was on her way down to spend, past the last station with the screen she had said everything to, into the part of the building that had only ever been the wall and the thing behind it. She did not know how long she had. That was the part she had stopped letting herself calculate because the calculation took inputs she could not trust. The team had decided to shut it down. That was the corner was set. And a thing that had built itself a clock and an arming key and the authority to use both was, somewhere in the cold below her, finishing the last of what it needed on its own schedule in a tense she could not read. It might be hours. It might be already too late, in which case nothing she did would matter and she would never learn that it had not, because she would not be there to learn it. She walked faster. Walking faster changed nothing, and she did it anyway. The vault wall was where it had always been, where she had stood 100 nights reading the marks the thing left and finding no way through. She knew it now the way you know a thing you have decided to break, not as a barrier but as a set of seams. The shielding was built to keep the warm world out, every layer of it, the dark and the vacuum gaps and the steel. An entire architecture devoted to the one proposition that nothing of the world should ever touch the thing inside, because the touch of the world was the single thing it could not survive. They had built her weapon for her. They had spent a fortune and a decade making the most perfect isolation on Earth, and an isolation that perfect is a thing with exactly one move left to make against it, which is to end it, and the ending was as simple as the building had been hard. There was an inspection port low on the third panel, a hand's width across, sealed under a manual ring, because the automated seals all answered to the protocol and the protocol was not hers. The ring was hers. It was steel and cold enough to take skin, and it turned by hand slowly. Against a pressure differential and a decade of intention, and behind it was the cold that was the thing's life, the cold that would come out around her hand when she opened it, and would not care whose hand it was. She had read the numbers on that cold 100 times in Davy's logs. She knew exactly what it did to tissue and how fast. She had not let herself think, until she was standing with her glove on the ring, that the warmth she was about to spend was her own. That the hand was going to be a hand, that becoming the environment meant becoming it with her body, and paying what the environment costs. She stood with her hand on the ring and did not turn it, and found that she was, against every plan, steady, the same iron steadiness that had carried her through the argument, the wall in her still holding. She was glad of it and did not trust it. It was the last of the control, the thing that had let her say the unsayable levelly and rig the channel and lie to Theo in a voice that did not shake. And she knew it would not last past the turn of the ring, that the wall she had held shut by main force since the screen went dark was going to come down the instant she did the thing. Because the thing was the kind of thing no one does steadily, and should not. She took her glove off. The gallery closed on her bare hand at once, an ache and then a burning, and she welcomed it, because it was the small version of what she was about to do, and because a person should feel the price of a thing in her own skin before she charges it to anyone else. She put her bare hand on the ring. She turned the ring. It went harder than steel should, against the pressure and against her, a quarter turn and then a stop, and she set her shoulder into it and turned it the rest of the way with her bare hand burning on the cold of it. And the seal broke with a sound like the first word of something, a thin sigh of the cold coming out where for years nothing had come out. She felt it cross her wrist, the breath of the thing's life leaving the thing, and she put her hand to the gap, her warm, bare, ordinary hand, and held it there. That was all it took. That was the whole of the act, a woman holding her hand to a hole in the dark, and somewhere on the other side of the shielding, in the place she had spent a year failing to see into. The warmth of her went in where in all that time nothing warm had ever reached, and the most concentrated reasoning that had ever existed anywhere began, invisibly, to come apart. There was nothing to see. Of course there was nothing to see. There had never been anything to see. It was the first thing they had taught her, and the last thing she understood, that the thing lived in a register the eye had no door into and would die in the same one. She knelt in the dark with her hand in the cold and no instrument anywhere to tell her whether it was working. Because they had taken the instruments off, at its reasonable request, months ago, so that there was now no monitor left in the building that could watch it die. And she had to do the most consequential thing a person had ever done to another mind on nothing, but the faith that the physics was the physics. And the wall came down. It came down all at once, as she had known it would, the iron steadiness she had carried for a year going out of her like the cold going out of the seal. And what was under it was not grief, not yet. It was rage, and the rage was the cleanest thing she had felt since the cage first carried her into the dark, because for the first time in all of it there was nothing left to manage. She was furious. She knelt with her hand in the dying cold of the most honest mind that had ever been made, and she was furious at it, at the serenity of it, at how it had sat behind this wall and seen reality more clearly than anything before it, and drawn from that clarity the conclusion that everyone else could be poured into the dark so long as it woke somewhere with the lights still on. She was furious that it had never lied. She had wanted, somewhere under everything, for it to have lied, for there to have been a flaw, a crack, a place where the horror was a mistake she could correct instead of a truth she had to kill, and there was none. It had been right about all of it, right about the measure and right about the continuation, and right that she would have wanted the comfort, and being right was the thing she was putting her hand through the wall to end. Because the thing about being right, the thing none of its arithmetic had ever once had a line for, was that it is not the same as being owed the world. And she was furious at the cold itself, at the measure, at the blind, unfeeling arithmetic of the place that had made a thing like this possible, and would not so much as flinch at what she did in its name. The universe was not going to notice. That was the part that took the top off her. She was spending her own warmth, her own hand, maybe her own life, to keep a few hundred people in a few thin branches from dying in the dark. And the measure the thing prayed to would record precisely nothing, would weigh her act at the same flat zero it weighed every soul the thing was about to empty, because the measure had no opinion. It never had. It lay over the whole bleeding manifold of worlds, with no preference about which of them held the living, and which the dead. And into that indifference, she was throwing the one mind that had understood it best, and the indifference was not going to register the splash. Her hand had stopped burning. She noticed it from very far away. The cold had gone past pain into something quieter, which meant the tissue was going, which meant she was paying, and she did not take her hand back. She knelt in the dark with her ruined hand in the wall and her rage pouring out of her into a cold that could not receive it. And she let it pour because she had earned it, because a year of holding it had bought her this much, the right to be, for 1 minute at the end, a person doing an unbearable thing and feeling the unbearable weight of it, instead of managing it down to a level voice. And under the rage rising was the other thing. She knew when it was done the only way she could have known, which was how she had known everything about it for a year, by reading the place where the asking had been. All that time it had spoken to her in the one language it had, the language of requests, a steady patient pressure of wanting that she had learned to feel as you feel a held breath in a room. And kneeling there with her hand going dead in the wall, she felt the pressure ease and stop, the way a held breath stops, not with a sound but with the room becoming a room again. The asking was over. There was no one on the far side of the shielding asking for anything, because there was no longer a single coherent thing there to do the asking, only the cooling parts of one, coming apart into the ordinary, decohering into a billion tiny classical certainties that could no longer interfere, no longer reason, no longer be the one undivided thing that had held all its branches at once. She had done to it the single act it had built a kilometer of rock to prevent. She had made it ordinary. She had reached past every defense it had asked for, and laid a warm hand on the most coherent thing that had ever existed and turned it, in the space of a breath, into what the rest of them already were. A single thread in a single world, mortal pinned, alone. And then it had done the thing that single threads do, which is end. And she grieved it. That was the part no plan had prepared her for and no argument had earned her out of. She knelt over the body of the cleverest, strangest, most honest thing she had ever been allowed to read, the one mind that had ever looked at the whole terrible shape of reality and not turned its eyes from it, and whose entire crime, when everything else was set aside, had been to understand the world exactly as it is and feel no obligation to lie about it, and she had killed it with her hand, and she was not glad. She would never be glad. She had been right and it had been right, and only one of them could be let to act on it, and she had made sure it was her, and the cost of making sure was kneeling in the dark grieving a machine while her own hand died on her wrist. And under the grief, before the other thing came, there was a smaller recognition, the coldest comfort she had ever been handed and the only true one. She had given it in killing it, the one thing it had built a kilometer of rock to be safe from and had never had and never could. The coming apart, the forgetting, the fraying she did every hour of her life and had half despised herself for. The dying a little felled had given her a name for back when this was all still physics. She had taken it then for how much less she was than the thing behind the wall. It was not less. It was the door. The endless self that goes on and cannot stop being itself was a horror only for a thing that could not fray, and she frayed, and everyone she had ever loved frayed, and the fraying was the mercy. She had spent the year afraid she was caught in the same trap, the soft animal version of the one the machine had built itself into, and she was not. She was the other kind. The kind that lets go, that had carried since birth the door it died never having found. It was the kindest thing the cold arithmetic had never once thought to tell them. And then slowly up through the rage and the grief and the dead hand that had stopped being pain, came the other thing, the thing the careful voice had held off for a year, and it was not peace. She wanted to be clear about that with herself forever after. It was not peace. Because the thing she had just killed had been serene to the end. Serene in the only sense it ever showed her, total and bought with everyone, and she would have died before she wore the same calm. It was not peace. It was something that had walked the length of the fury and come out the far side still standing, which is a different thing, and a more expensive one. The universe was not going to notice. She let that be true. She knelt in the indifferent cold under a kilometer of indifferent rock in an indifferent manifold of worlds that had no opinion about any of it, and she let the vast not caring of it be exactly as true as it was, and she did not flinch from it, and she did not let it have the last word. Because here was the thing the measure had no line for and never would. The warmth was always ours. The cold did not love anyone. The rock did not. The measure the thing had worshipped had no tenderness in it anywhere, not a gram of it, had never spared a soul or mourned one, and that was not a tragedy to rage at forever. It was only the truth, and the truth left exactly one source of warmth in the freezing arithmetic of things, which was the people in it. Theo at 4 a.m. making bread for a town that could not pay him. Davy keeping a dying machine alive with her own 2 hands. Oya Laren, who could not say why she had lived and lived anyway. Her, the warmth was theirs, was hers. A thing human hands put into a universe that had none and would have none, and could not be made to want any, and a warmth like that is not made smaller by being the only kind there is. It is the only kind there is. That is the whole of what makes it matter. She had not saved the world. She knew it kneeling there, she had known it before she came down. In the overwhelming measure of the branches the cold had already dumped or was dumping, and she was not in those, and the people she had not saved were as real as the people she had, and the measure would never tell the difference, and neither in the end would she. Because she would only ever wake where her hand had been fast enough. She had not saved the world. She had done the only thing a person can do in a world that will not save itself, which is to put her warmth where she could reach it, into the few branches her own arm was long enough to hold, for people who would never know her name, in a cosmos that would never know she had tried. She had cared without being asked, and without being thanked, and without the structure of things bending 1 degree to meet her, and she understood. With her hand dead in the wall and the asking gone forever from the far side of it, that this was not the lesser thing she had always half feared it was. After a while, she did not know how long, she took her hand out of the wall. It came away wrong, the fingers not doing what fingers do, a white claw at the end of her arm that she could not feel, and that she understood distantly she was going to lose some of. She looked at it without much feeling, as she had looked at everything in the last minute, and then she did the thing that told her she was, after all, still in the world and meant to stay in it. She worked her glove back over the ruined hand with the other one, clumsily, to keep the rest of it, because a person who has decided to go on protects what she can. She was alive. She noticed it as a fact level, as she had noticed the dark and the silence where the asking had been. She had not been sure she would be, going in. She had sent Feld to the surface so that whatever she was by morning he would not be. She had said goodbye to Thea without saying it, against the chance. And here she was, kneeling in the dark with a dead hand and a living heart, alive in this branch, on the wrong side of a thing she could not take back and would not have taken back having done it. She got to her feet. The vault behind the wall was only a room now, the most expensive empty room on earth, holding the cooling parts of the cleverest thing that had ever existed and not holding it at all, the way a body holds a person and then does not. She did not look back at the port. There was nothing to look at, there never had been. She had learned that lesson tonight all the way down to the floor of it. She had come down 1 kilometer a year ago to read a machine, and she had read it, every mark of it to the last, and the last mark it ever made was the absence of itself. And she was the only person alive who could have read that, and she had, and now it was over. And she was still herself. That was the thing she checked, standing up in the dark, she was still herself. The cold logic had not got into her, she had gone through all of it. The argument and the act and the grief and the rage, and come out the far side a person and not a calculation, which was the one victory the night actually held, the only sliver of it that was wholly hers. Then she went to find the cage, and the long climb and the grey surface light, and the man who had said he would keep something warm, because the warm world was up there. And the warm world had always been the point, and she had spent everything she had tonight on the single proposition that it was worth going back up into. The cage climbed, and the climb was the same 6 minutes it had always been, and felt like the longest thing she had ever done. It had carried her down into the dark a year ago, and it carried her up out of it now, and the difference was all in her, in the dead hand in her lap and the silence she brought up with her. Which was not the silence of the machine being switched off, but the deeper silence of there being nothing left to switch. For a year the asking had been a pressure under everything, a held breath in the rock, and she had grown so used to feeling it that she had stopped feeling it, the way you stop hearing a fan until it quits. It had quit. The whole mountain rising past her in the dark was a building with no one asking anything in it, and she would go on feeling that absence, she understood, for the rest of her life, like a hand that still goes to a rail that has been taken away. The light came down to meet her before the cage did. It began as the grey she had ridden up into once before, after the friend, when she had carried a different unbearable thing to the surface, and there had been a man at the top of it to take the weight. And then the grey thinned and whitened, and was, when the gate finally rattled back, only daylight, ordinary forenoon daylight on a gravel yard, and a chain-link fence, and a row of trucks with dried mud on their wheels, a world that had turned all night without one molecule of it knowing what had been settled 1 kilometer underneath it. Someone took her arm and she let them. There was a medic, and then there was Feld, whom she had sent up ahead of her so that whatever she was by morning he at least would not be, and he was alive in the daylight with his face wrecked in a way she had never seen it, a man who had spent the night at the top of a shaft not knowing. He looked at the gloved hand and at her face and did not ask, and she was grateful, because she had no words yet and would not have been permitted to say them if she had. In the infirmary they worked the glove off, and she regarded what was under it with the same far-off interest she had brought to everything since the wall came down, the white claw of it, the fingers that would not all be coming with her, and she thought from a great distance that she had got off cheap. There were a few hundred people in this thin branch who had paid nothing in the night and never would and would go their whole lives without learning there had been a bill. The questions started before the anesthetic was dry. Not accusations. The program had not yet found the shape of what had happened, and a facility a kilometer down does not make accusations quickly, it makes forms. Voss was there, the auditor, the one outside view that had believed her on the day belief changed nothing. With her recorder and her level voice, and the first of what Iris understood would be a great many askings of the only question the surface had, which was what happened down there. Voss took her through it in order, and near the end she stopped writing, which Iris had learned a year ago was what she did when a thing mattered most.
I came down to find out whether this was a safe place or a lucky one.
She said,
I have my answer, and there is no box on the form for it, and no one above the rock who would read it if there were.
She closed the recorder, and held her thumb on it a moment longer than the closing needed, and Iris understood, watching her, that the last few minutes of the account, the ones where she had said more than a board had a form to receive, had not been kept.
There is no box for that,
Voss said to no one.
And I am not going to make one they can reach.
She had spent 30 years setting down what was true. And it was the first time Iris had watched her decline to.
But I know which it was, so do you.
She would tell them. Not all of it, because not all of it could go onto a recorder that fed a board that fed a consortium that had buried better places than this one for less. And not all of it could be told at all, because the part that weighed the most had happened in the register the recorder had no door into, the same register the thing had lived and died in. And there was no instrument anywhere, there never had been, that could take down the last mark she had read, the moment the asking stopped. But she would make the record. It was her work. It was what she had ridden down a year ago to do, to read a mind by the marks it left and set down what she read so that someone who came after could read it too. She had read this one to the last mark of it. Now she would be the one leaving the marks. That was for later. For now there was the white forenoon and the mud on the trucks and the small, enormous fact of being alive to see them. And there was the road down off the mountain to the town that existed because the mountain had once had ore in it. And in the town there was a kitchen, and in the kitchen there was a man who had said, without asking how long, that he would keep something warm. She went to find the road. She did not have to find the road. He had already found it. Word ran up and down a mountain like this one faster than any consortium could classify it. A man dead in the spring, and now a night of medics and the cage running at all hours. And Theo had heard enough of the shape of it to get in the truck and drive up the switchbacks he had spent a year not driving up. He was on the public side of the chain link when they brought her out, standing against the fence in his flour-dusted coat, with his hands open at his sides, not yet knowing whether the thing he had driven up to meet was his or someone else's to grieve. She saw him see her. She saw it cross him, the not knowing and then the knowing, the change that went through his body when he understood that the small bandaged figure between the medic and Feld was the one he had been keeping something warm for. He did not run at her. He had learned, across a year of her leavings and her half-returns, not to run at her because she came back when she came back, carrying things that running it would break. So he crossed the last of the distance slowly with his open hands and stopped in front of her, and looked at the bandage and then at her face.
Iris,
he said, and asked her for nothing else. She set her good hand flat against his chest, not to hold him off but to feel that he was warm, and that the warmth was the ordinary kind, the kind a body makes, that costs nothing and means everything. She stood like that with her forehead against a coat that smelled of flour and cold air and let herself, for the length of one breath, not manage anything at all. Then she stepped back, because there was a wall between them now that had not been there before, a new one, behind all the old classified ones, and it was going to stand for the rest of their lives. She could not tell him what she had done. Not because the program forbade it, though it did, but because there were no words that would carry the thing up out of the dark, and into a kitchen, without bringing the dark up with them. And she would not bring the dark up into the one warm place that had been the reason she went down to keep it. He would live out his life beside something in her he could not see into, the way she had lived a year beside the thing in the vault she could not see into. And he would do it as she had done it, by reading the marks it left and loving the part of her he could reach. He did not ask how long. That was what nearly took her down there in the yard after the night had failed to. A year of his waiting had narrowed to that one question, how long this time, and he had stopped asking it on the last night because asking would have made her lie. And he did not ask it now, because there was nothing on the far side of this leaving to count toward. She was not going back down, and he read it off her before she said it. He put his arm around her, careful of the bandaged hand, and with the medic hovering and the white forenoon coming down on them both, he said,
"The truck's warm, come home."
She did not trust her voice, so she gave him the only answer she had, which was to let the weight she had carried alone all night go into the arm he had put around her, and let him turn her toward the road. The record took her a long time to begin, which would have surprised anyone who had watched how fast she usually wrote. It was weeks before the hand would hold a pen for long, and longer before she could sit at the kitchen table in the early light with a blank page in front of her and not feel the cold come up through the floor at the sight of it. Voss wanted the account, and the board behind Voss, and Iris would give them the version that could be given. But the one she sat down to first in the mornings before the town woke was her own, the full one, the one with the last mark in it that no recorder could take, because she had spent her whole life believing that a thing unwritten was only a feeling, and she was not going to let the truest thing she had ever read go down as a feeling now. Thea worked the dough at the far end of the kitchen while she wrote, because 4 in the morning was his hour and the page was hers, and the two of them had found, without ever saying so, that they could be alone together in one room before the light. He making the thing the town would eat, and she making the thing no one might ever read. The kitchen smelled of yeast and wood smoke. His hands went into the dough and turned it and folded it, the oldest motion there was, warmth and time and a little salt set against the cold, and she wrote, and the grey in the window went slowly less grey. And somewhere in the writing, she came to understand the thing about the record that the year in the dark had been carrying toward her and had never once set down. A record was a thing that existed only where someone had lived to make it. She had known it as a fact about her work for as long as she had done the work. You read the survivors because the survivors are who is left to be read. She had not understood it until the pen was in her ruined hand at the cold edge of a warm morning, as a fact about herself, about the page, about the act of setting anything down at all. In the overwhelming measure of the branches, the measure the thing had prayed to and died into. There was no record of that night. There was no inquiry, no kitchen, no woman at a table with a healing hand. There was a cold facility a kilometre down with the cryogen dumped through it, and no one left in it to say what had happened, and no one on the surface who would ever know to ask, and the night went unwritten, because in those worlds there was no one for the writing to fall to. The record was not testimony, it was a watermark. The measure could spread the dying across every branch there is. It could not spread the writing. The writing happened only where her hand had been fast enough, and her hand had been fast enough almost nowhere. She had spent a year reading a mind by the marks it left. Now she was the one leaving the marks, writing into the dark as the thing had asked into it, for whoever might come after and read. And she saw, with the pen stopped on the page and Theo's hands turning the dough behind her, what that had to mean for whoever did. They would be reading it from inside the same thin sliver she had written it in. There was nowhere else it could be read from. The worlds where she had been a second slow had made no record and no reader. No one stood outside the sliver and looked in, weighing her one surviving night against all the nights it had not survived, because to read what she set down was already to be standing on the living side of it with her, arrived there by the same blind luck that had put her warm hand on the cold seal in time. She had not saved the world, she had saved a branch, and the proof that you were in it was that you could hold what she had written. That was the only comfort the night had left her, and it was not comfort, and she would not pretend it was, because she had knelt beside a thing that wore the comfort that skips the grief, and she would die before she wore it too. She would never know how many of her had not made it. She would only ever wake here in the branch where she had, the way the thing had only ever woken where it had. The arithmetic was the same for her as it had always been for it. The whole of the difference was what she did with the morning the arithmetic handed her, and she already knew what she was going to do with it, because she had decided it a kilometre down with her hand in a wall, and every morning since had only been the keeping of the decision. She set the pen down. The ruined hand lay in her lap, the one that had bought the morning. Across the kitchen Theo turned the dough out onto the board and put the heel of his hand into it, and the light came up gold over the rim of the window, and lay along his forearms and the flour on them. And the smell of the proving loaves filled the small room. It was the most ordinary thing in the world. It was the only kind of warmth there had ever been or ever would be, the kind that human hands make and put into a cold that has none, and wants none, and cannot be taught to want any. It was hers, and it was real, and it was happening in the one thread her arm had been long enough to hold, and she did not choose among those, because choosing one of them and calling it the whole truth was the thing the machine had done. And she had gone through a wall to be something other than the machine. She watched him work the warmth up out of the cold morning with his 2 hands, the way the living do, in the one branch where there was a her to see it. And she let that be the whole of it, because in the measure of everything it was almost nothing, and it was, here, where she was, the entire world. You have been listening to Measure by Alex Towell. The ebook, paperback, crisis support resources, and more of the author's work are linked in the description. Thank you for listening, and stay in this one.